White-collar crime doesn't shout. It whispers. Behind the glass doors, under the glow of boardroom lights. That's where the real games are played. No masks, no weapons, just charm, strategy, and silence. These are stories of polished liars, of people who didn't need to break in because they were already inside. Every number carefully moved, every signature a calculated risk, and every downfall quietly devastating. So if you're ready, sit back, let the rain fall, and let me tell you how it all came undone. One deal, one lie, one signature at a time. At the glass-walled headquarters on Smith Street, sunlight bounced off 40 stories of blue steel, hiding a darkness that grew thicker by the quarter. From the lobby, visitors saw the energy giant as bold, futuristic, unassailable, an empire of pipelines and power contracts that seemed to hum with limitless potential. Only a handful of insiders knew that inside the sleek conference rooms, the numbers no longer matched the glow of the ticker symbol that raced across financial news screens. It began with an ambition so fierce it blurred into desperation. The chief financial officer, Andrew Fastow, had once been the humble kid from Houston who loved spreadsheets more than sports. Promotion after promotion hardened that earnestness into something sharper, almost predatory. He discovered that Wall Street adored growth stories and Wall Street hated surprises. So when gas prices slumped and deregulation stalled, he watched the revenue curves flatten. His solution was elegant in its audacity: build new entities, special-purpose vehicles, outside the mother company's books, then sell the company's future revenues to those entities as if they were cash in hand. The balance sheet would gleam again, the stock price would keep rising, bonuses would remain lavish. Fastow christened the first vehicle LJM, initials borrowed from his wife Leah and their two sons, Jeffrey and Matthew. Even that choice was a kind of talisman, family woven into finance, risk disguised as domestic warmth. LJM bought underperforming assets from the parent company at inflated prices, using money borrowed against Enron stock. The circular flow of capital was dizzying to outsiders, but inside the corridors of 1400 Smith Street, a whispered slogan took hold: "We are smarter than the skeptics." Board meetings turned theatrical. Executives projected multicolored graphs that only went up. Skittish directors nodded, soothed by jargon they half understood. Meanwhile, rank-and-file employees sent a percentage of every paycheck into company shares, believing their futures were tethered to a comet. On the 26th floor, the legal department drafted disclosures so dense they might as well have been smoke. Across town, a young securities analyst named Sharon Watkins pieced together clues. She noticed how the debt load vanished in footnotes, how cash flow never quite squared with reported earnings. She felt the tug of loyalty. After all, the company had once felt like a family, but the logic of the spreadsheet kept pointing to the same abyss. In August, she wrote a confidential memo to the chief executive, warning that Fastow structures could collapse, like a house of cards. Her language was measured, but her pulse pounded as she hit send. For nearly 2 months, nothing happened. The CEO, a genial salesman revered for turning deregulation into myth, forwarded the memo to outside counsel, then flew to a charity golf tournament. Inside the finance wing, Fastow's lieutenants burned through nights, engineering fresh partnerships. Raptor, Jedi, Chuko, each with friendlier acronyms, each hungrier for the company's shares. The models worked only if the stock price stayed aloft. If it faltered, collateral calls would surge, demanding real cash nobody had. Autumn arrived. A skeptical journalist at the Wall Street Journal began calling former employees, chasing rumors of off-balance sheet debt. Fastow's name surfaced again and again, always with an edge of fear. The journalist's story landed on page 1, outlining a tangle of shell companies no reader could quite unravel, but everyone sensed was rotten. The market flinched. Enron stock slid from $90 to $60 in a week. Suddenly the models groaned. Bankers who had once bowed to Fastow now circled back with polite but urgent questions. Could the firm post additional collateral? Might executives appear on an investor call? Each inquiry stripped away a layer of confidence. When credit rating agencies downgraded the company's bonds, the final safeguard snapped. Debt hidden in footnotes flooded onto the balance sheet like spring runoff through a cracked levee. By October, the trading floor felt eerily subdued. Phones rang, but conversations were staccato, hushed. Employees watched their retirement accounts shrink in real time. Some could not bring themselves to sell, still anchored to the rhetoric of invincibility. Others hit liquidate and walked away blinking as if emerging from a long dream. The board convened an emergency session and accepted Fasto's resignation, yet the gesture came too late. Without the wizard, the partnerships lost their reason to exist. Without the partnerships, the company's capital structure imploded. One brisk Monday, auditors from Arthur Andersen, once partners in crafting the illusion, suddenly turned prosecutors, shredding years of work paper files. But the audit firm itself was now tainted, bound to the same fate as its star client. Federal investigators descended on Houston like winter crows. They interviewed accountants, retrieved backdated emails, subpoenaed phone logs. Fasto, cornered, invoked the Fifth Amendment in front of congressional cameras, his prior swagger reduced to silence. Executives who had jockeyed for parking spots now competed for immunity deals. Behind closed doors, they spoke of bad optics, unintended consequences, anything but lies. In early December, the company filed for Chapter 11 protection, the largest bankruptcy in American history at the time. 40,000 people worldwide lost jobs or pensions. The skyline still carried the company's name in neon, but the lights now flickered like a broken promise. Years later, a former pipeline engineer would drive past 1400 Smith Street with her teenage son. She would point upward toward the mirrored panes and say, "That's where we thought we were changing the world." Her voice would trail into an unfinished sentence. The boy, who had learned about Enron in civics class, would nod thoughtfully, sensing the invisible weight his mother still carried. In a federal courtroom, Andrew Fasto eventually stood to address victims before sentencing. He spoke softly, acknowledging greed, vanity, and the quiet moral drift that accompanies unchecked ambition. The judge listened, unimpressed, and pronounced a term of 6 years. Outside, reporters jostled for position, eager to frame the perfect headline. Yet for many ordinary investors, the story's final act had already concluded, in monthly statements that arrived thinner, then ceased altogether. Back on Smith Street, the skyscraper found a new tenant, a different logo sheathed in LED white. Tourists might gaze up, admiring the architecture, unaware of the ledger lines once forged in its shadows. But at dusk, when the windows reflect the setting sun, the building seems to hold its breath, a silent reminder that brilliance untethered from truth becomes, inevitably, a mirage. Beneath the soft Bavarian sky, the campus in Ascium looked like a tech dream rendered in glass and brushed steel. Employees tapped access cards at dawn, sipping macchiatos while screens in the lobby displayed a looping animation, a blue globe connected by pulsing orange lines, each dot symbolizing an imaginary payment rushing through the firm's servers. To outsiders, Wirecard was Europe's answer to Silicon Valley, lean, bold, eternally scaling. Its founder CEO Marcus Braun strode the halls in black turtlenecks, quoting Sapiens and promising that cash itself would soon be obsolete. Investors rewarded the vision, pushing the stock into the DAX index alongside centuries-old industrial titans. Yet on the 7th floor, bookkeeper Pavitra Ramani felt a tiny chill each time the monthly figures arrived from Manila and Dubai. The numbers pulsed upward in perfect rhythm as if choreographed. According to the spreadsheets, billions of euros were parked in 2 Philippine banks, escrowed for Asian partners who handled third-party acquiring. Pavitra had never met a single employee of those partners, but emails appeared whenever audit season loomed, signed with unlikely Anglo-German names and closing lines like warm hugs from Mindanao. She mentioned her doubts to a colleague during a lunch break. He shrugged. "Jan handles Asia," he said, meaning Jan Marsalek, the rakish chief operating officer with a talent for speaking fluent charm in 5 languages. Marsalek loved secrets. He hosted midnight coding hackathons, arrived at board meetings with covert ops anecdotes, and collected antique maps annotated in invisible ink. When analysts asked about the Asian cash flows, He rolled out a lacquered chart showing hockey stick curves and finished with a grin that suggested the question itself was naive. The board, dazzled, applauded his boundary-pushing mindset. Across the channel, a Financial Times reporter named Dan sensed a riddle. Wirecard's margin was too fat for a payments processor, its disclosures too thin. He visited opaque addresses in Singapore only to find locked rooms or call centers with no trace of the supposed billions. Each article he published drew venom. Wirecard hired private detectives who tailed him to cafes, photographing his laptop screen from a neighboring table. In Munich, Braun stood before cameras, decrying false narratives spread by short sellers who would profit from panic. Shareholders cheered his defiance. The stock bounced higher. Back in Askium, Pavitra opened the quarterly reconciliation file and froze. One Philippine account number had switched digits, just two, but the balance remained identical to the cent. She reread Jan's last email. All good here, please focus on closing tasks. Busy night ahead. The unease grew heavier. She drafted an anonymous letter to compliance, slid it into a gray mailbox, and went home to her tiny apartment overlooking the Izar. Sleep eluded her. Uncertainty rhythmically drummed on the roof like summer rain. The compliance officer, an earnest lawyer named Suzanne, brought the letter to Braun the next morning. He skimmed it, tapped the paper twice and said, "We'll let EY handle that." Ernst & Young had audited Wirecard for over a decade. Their partners enjoyed the prestige, the fees, the futuristic conferences in Dubai. When Suzanne pressed, Braun smiled. "Trust the process. We're a regulated bank now." But regulators in BaFin were beginning to sweat. They had once banned short selling of Wirecard, seeking to silence market manipulation, yet the drip of suspicious reports refused to stop. An outside whistleblower, hiding behind burner emails, sent BaFin a PDF marked confidential. It listed merchants that allegedly processed millions through Wirecard, except some were defunct flower shops or one-room travel agencies. The mathematics screamed. On a foggy March morning, KPMG forensic auditors arrived, laptops in hand, badges clipped to suit jackets. Marsalek greeted them, offered artisan chocolates, and steered them toward a polished conference room nicknamed Innovation Lab. Still, when KPMG requested bank statements from the Philippines, the atmosphere chilled. Days passed. Explanations mutated. Local holidays, clerical snafus, typhoon disruptions. Finally, an email came from a Manila trustee, attaching PDFs that looked freshly stitched together in Adobe. Embedded metadata revealed the files had been generated the previous night on a laptop registered to a Wirecard intern in Vienna. The stalling cracked in June. Wirecard announced it could not locate. 1.9 billion, supposedly held offshore. The figure hung in headlines like a cartoon anvil. Munich prosecutors opened a fraud probe. Police raided the campus at dawn, seizing servers while employees stood outside clutching laptops like life vests. Braun resigned that afternoon, eyes ringed with sleepless circles, but insisted the money might yet be reallocated. Marsalek vanished. His last confirmed sighting was at a small Austrian airfield, boarding a bombardier jet bound for Minsk. He left behind a tote bag containing 3 burner phones and a worn paperback titled The Art of Disappearance. Interpol issued a red notice. Rumors swirled of safe houses in Moscow, of Libyan paramilitaries financed by undisclosed crypto wallets. None were confirmed. For Pavitra, the unraveling felt both vindication and dread. Friends texted congratulations for calling it, yet her savings were locked in plummeting employee shares. She watched news feeds show drones circling the empty CO suite, the horizon behind it bruised by storm clouds. A class-action lawsuit gathered tens of thousands of retirees whose pensions had bet on Wirecard's unstoppable ascent. In court, Braun appeared subdued in a navy suit that suddenly looked 2 sizes too large. He spoke of gaps in oversight, of being misled by subordinates, and occasionally of his childhood fascination with Star Trek, where technology always served a higher moral arc. The judges listened impassively. Pavitra, sitting in the back row, noticed he never once uttered Marsalek's name. When the verdict came, years of imprisonment for Braun, warrants for fugitives, fines measured in 9 figures, It landed like a muted thunderclap. The wider damage, though, was measured in something less quantifiable. A renewed mistrust of German corporate governance, a lingering suspicion that glossy presentations cloak hollow cores. The Askium campus found a new tenant, another fintech vowing transparency. The globe in the lobby now glows green instead of blue. At night, the cleaning crew sometimes hears the old animation reset, a soft electronic chime echoing down empty corridors, vanishing funds forever in transit. Pavitra keeps a copy of the anonymous letter in a locked drawer. Occasionally she rereads the shaky sentences and wonders why courage always feels so lonely until the moment everything collapses. On those evenings she switches off her lamp, looks toward the river, and lets the quiet settle like dust over a phantom sun that once dazzled Europe and turned out never to exist at all. Bernard L. Madoff moved through Midtown Manhattan like a man forever in soft focus. He wore understated suits, spoke in measured tones, and treated doormen by name. At 7:05 each morning he stepped from a black Lincoln Town car into the lobby of the Lipstick Building, greeting security with a gentle wave before disappearing into a private elevator that rose to the 17th floor. Employees called it the split-level heaven, because half the space dazzled visitors. Polished wood framed certificates, a receptionist who served cucumber water, while the other half, hidden behind a locked door, thrummed with fluorescent lights and secrets. Madoff's legitimate brokerage business occupied the glossy front. There, salespeople pitched market-making services and showed off computer screens streaming ticker tape in every color. But beyond the coded door sat the investment advisory unit, a cramped rectangle of mismatched desks, dot matrix printers, and metal filing cabinets. Inside, a handful of clerks printed trade confirmations that no one placed, sealed them in envelopes, and fed them into an ancient postage machine. The hum of that machine became the soundtrack of an illusion. For decades, the returns had seemed miraculous yet oddly steady, never a spectacular spike, never a catastrophic dip. Wealth managers from Palm Beach to Geneva called the strategy too good to question, and their clients agreed. Jewish charities, university endowments, and movie stars wired money to an account at Chase Manhattan labeled BLMS, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. When skeptical analysts asked how the gains were generated, Madoff replied with a patient smile and two soothing words: split-strike conversion, a phrase that hovered between jargon and magic spell. He started small, back in the 1960s, juggling real trades with imaginary ones to smooth out bad quarters. Each time he meant to correct the books, markets rebounded, and the temptation to maintain the fiction grew. Success attracted fresh cash. Fresh cash required larger deceptions. By the 1990s, the books held billions. Madoff told himself he was buying time, just until volatility subsided, just until a new algorithm worked. Eventually, the hope of escape hardened into routine. The scheme ceased to feel temporary, it became the business. On the 9th floor, a silver-haired accountant named Frank D. Pascali supervised the printing of statements. He loved the petty power, ordering junior clerks to round gains upward by exactly 2 decimal places, selecting blue rather than black ink because auditors once praised its legibility. When a client asked for a withdrawal, Frank logged into a spreadsheet, shifted numbers like furniture, and handed a cashier's check to Madoff for signature. The system depended on constant inflows, and inflows never seemed to slow. Yet beyond the island of Wall Street, tremors gathered. In Boston, a quantitative analyst named Harry Markopoulos tried to replicate Madoff's performance and failed. The mathematics screamed impossibility. Markopoulos alerted the SEC 5 times, sending charts, footnotes, even a spreadsheet titled, "The World's Largest Ponzi Scheme." Regulators glanced, filed, postponed. Madoff's resume, former NASDAQ chairman, philanthropic donor, carried a gravity that data could not. Inside the 17th floor, December 2008 dawned like any other day. Stale coffee, the whir of the postage machine, Frank barking at a clerk for misaligning perforated paper. But outside, the world had shifted. Lehman Brothers had collapsed. Investors, suddenly frightened, demanded liquidity. Redemption requests topped $7 billion. In a single week, more than the cash actually parked at Chase. Madoff stared at the ledger, throat dry. The chain letter had reached its final envelope. That evening, he invited his two sons, Mark and Andrew, to his apartment overlooking the East River. They had worked in the legitimate arm and believed their father an oracle. Over plates of takeout sushi, Madoff confessed in blunt sentences. "It's all one big lie," he said. "A giant Ponzi scheme." The words sounded unreal, like dialogue from a late-night thriller. He asked them to give him 24 hours to get things in order. Instead, they contacted an attorney and turned him in. The next morning, FBI agents arrived at the Upper East Side penthouse. Madoff answered the door in loafers and a monogram dressing gown. When asked if there was an innocent explanation, he shook his head. "There is no innocent explanation," he said quietly, a line recorded in the arrest report like a closing bell. News rippled across time zones. At a Palm Beach country club, retirees stared at televisions above the bar, watching their supposed nest eggs vanish in a crawl of red headlines. In Geneva, private bankers phoned clients at dawn to deliver apologies instead of returns. Jewish charities canceled scholarships, scientists shelved drug research grants, newly widowed donors contemplated selling family homes. On the 17th floor, U.S. Marshals collected towers of cardstock statements. Millions of pages sprinkled with ticker symbols that never touched an exchange. They boxed up the dot matrix printers, each still warm, as if evidence could carry body heat. Frank DePascali, handcuffed, murmured that he only followed orders, an echo from darker histories. In court, Madoff stood alone before a packed gallery. He described a long slide from legitimate trading into total fabrication, apologizing without tears. When the judge pronounced a 150-year sentence, a hush fell, broken by a victim's single word, "monster." Yet the courtroom air also held a strange pity, for Madoff looked diminished, an aging tailor who'd sewn a suit too large, drowned now in its folds. Trustees clawed back funds from early investors, redistributing fragments to those ruined. Years later, the recovery rate would hit an astonishing 70%. Cold comfort for lives already rerouted by loss. Mark Madoff, unable to escape shadows, took his own life on the second anniversary of his father's arrest. Andrew would succumb to cancer 4 years after that. The cost of deceit measured itself not only in dollars but in chairs left empty at family tables. The Lipstick Building still rises over 3rd Avenue, lipstick red granite gleaming at sunset. Tenants walk past a brass directory listing new company names, unaware that one floor once printed illusions with the steadiness of a heartbeat. Sometimes, in the hush of early evening, a janitor pauses by the freight elevator and swears he hears the faint clatter of a postage machine, stamping statements destined never to arrive. Between the mirrored towers of La Défense, Société Générale's glass cube shimmered like an instrument perfectly tuned to Parisian ambition. Inside, swarms of young quants crunched probabilities, betting on the subtle tremors of European futures. Among them worked Jerome Kerviel, a trader so ordinary that colleagues sometimes forgot he was there. He dressed in off-the-rack suits, spoke with a Breton lilt, and rode the arriere each dawn clutching a baguette wrapped in brown paper. Yet tucked behind his unremarkable manner lay a simmering conviction. He deserved to play on the grandest stage, even if it meant building one himself. Kerviel's official mandate was modest: small, low-risk arbitrage between German and French stock index futures. His supervisors liked the arrangement: limited exposure, predictable fees, no headlines. But the trading floor pulsed with louder stories. A desk mate once cleared a 7-figure bonus after a single winning quarter, while senior managers quoted Sun Tzu between sips of espresso. Ambition, floating in the recycled air, slipped into Kerviel's lungs with every breath. He began by nudging limits. The bank's risk systems allowed him to enter exploratory trades that could be canceled before settlement. Kerviel discovered he could book a genuine position, then enter an opposite, fictitious offset just long enough for compliance reports to balance. At day's end, he deleted the phantom hedge, leaving the real bet humming, invisible, across the server racks. No alarm rang. The next morning, profits, tiny at first, appeared like loose coins nobody claimed. The game escalated. He forged email confirmations from a broker in London, copying formatting down to the stray double space after each comma. Control officers received the messages, nodded at the familiar layout, and clicked archive. By autumn, his exposure topped 10 billion euros. One man quietly leveraged beyond the GDP of small nations. Kerviel's screen flashed green more often than red, and the rush felt electrifying, as though Paris itself bowed to his keystrokes. His bonus that year, a respectable 60,000 euros, far below the millions pocketed by peers. Management praised his prudence, unaware the true figures lurked off-sheet. Frustration hardened into daring. He promised himself that the next quarter would be spectacular, undeniable. January 2008 arrived with low clouds and brittle air. Global markets jittered over subprime tremors. Kerviel doubled down, now gambling. 50 billion. A position larger than the bank's own authorized trading book. Still, internal models reported minor net risk, thanks to the mirrored fictions he refreshed hourly. On Friday the 18th, European indices dipped sharply. Kerviel's hidden bets plummeted, dragging the ledger toward catastrophe. Unable to conjure profits from thin air, he did what gamblers do at the edge of a cliff. He bet again, hoping Monday's opening bell would reverse fate. Instead, the slide accelerated. Losses ballooned beyond any previous rogue trading scandal, dwarfing Barings, dwarfing imagination. Compliance officers finally noticed a trade referencing a non-existent counterparty. They summoned Kerviel to a glass conference room. He arrived calm, hair slightly disheveled from the metro wind. When pressed about the phantom hedge, he uttered 3 words, "C'est un erreur." But further questions found no bottom. The hedges unraveled like thread pulled from a cheap sweater, revealing naked positions vast enough to sink the bank. That weekend, Société Générale's chairman locked himself inside an upstairs boardroom, curtains drawn against journalists gathering below. Traders in hoodies unwound Kerviel's portfolio through the night, dumping futures in chunks so large they distorted global indices. By dawn, the bank had lost 4.9 billion euros, erased in 48 hours of forced liquidation. Spreadsheets rendered the figure precise. In human scale, it felt mythic, as if Paris had suddenly misplaced a cathedral. Monday's newspaper screamed traitor Folie, Eliseus Kerviel, who watches the numbers. The French finance minister fielded calls from Berlin and Brussels, each seeking reassurance that contagion would not leap across borders. On the trading floor, employees avoided one another's eyes, afraid their glances might be misread as blame. Police arrested Kerviel in a modest apartment near Gare Montparnasse. Reporters captured the image. A pale man in jeans, neither mastermind nor monster, escorted past overflowing trash bins. During interrogation, he insisted the bank condoned risk so long as it sparkled green on quarterly slides. "Everyone knew," he said softly, "maybe not the scale but the spirit." Investigators half believed him. The line between sanctioned audacity and forbidden gamble had grown porous throughout finance's long boom. In court, prosecutors painted Kerviel as a lone saboteur. Defense lawyers countered with portraits of a culture intoxicated by profit, where a young man with limited authority could manipulate systems designed to be robust. Judges listened, furrowed, and finally declared him guilty of breach of trust and forgery, sentencing him to 5 years, 2 suspended. The bank sought restitution for every cent, a demand so absurd it bordered on tragic farce. A mid-level trader ordered to repay billions he had never possessed. Public opinion fractured. Some saw Kerviel as folk anti-hero, David flinging code at a Goliath bank that only feigned surprise when stones bounced back. Others labeled him epitome of reckless ego. He left prison under partial house arrest, finding work installing computer networks for a small IT company, carrying routers instead of futures. Société Générale tightened controls, layering algorithms atop algorithms, yet whispers lingered. If one man could hide billions, could another? Compliance seminars quoted the affair like scripture, every slide ending with the same moral: transparency, vigilance, humility. At dusk, cleaners polishing glass partitions might pause, sensing echoes of unseen trades once ricocheting between monitors. La Défense still glints at sunset. Commuters stream past outdoor sculptures while news tickers glide along tower facades. Broadcasting indices Kerviel once nudged from a single desk. In moments of reflection he admits the rush remains vivid. Those split seconds when markets bent to will. Then he remembers the dawn after, the siren outside his window, the metallic taste of a world suddenly, irreparably awake to his invisibility. Dixon, Illinois, sat where the Rock River bent around silos and water towers. Here Abraham Lincoln once mustered. Here summer nights smelled of cut hay and engine oil. City Hall, a boxy brick building on Hennepin Avenue, seemed too modest for drama. Inside, the comptroller's office radiated the comfort of routine. Beige binders, a desktop calendar, the steady click of a 10-key calculator operated by Rita Crundwell. She had started as a part-time clerk at 17, rising in quiet increments until every budget line passed beneath her red-tipped nails. Council members trusted her implicitly. Auditors praised her ledgers. Bankers greeted her with small-town familiarity veined by deference. Few noticed that Crundwell's other life gleamed far beyond the prairie. Most weekends she drove a silver motorhome to horse shows across the Midwest, hauling a polished trailer bearing the logo RC Quarter Horses. Spectators ogled her geldings, names like Goodeye Will Be and Pizzazza, creatures bred for perfection, muscles rippling under chestnut coats. Crundwell, in rhinestone jackets, accepted trophies with a composed smile, then photographed each ribbon for the ranch's website. Fellow breeders wondered how a municipal salary funded such magnificence. She shrugged, "I'm just good with money." The money flowed through an account titled RSED, Reserve Sewer Capital Development Account, a phrase so dull it lulled curiosity to sleep. In 1990, facing tight budgets, Crundwell had opened the account at Fifth Third Bank, listing herself and the mayor as signatories. The mayor never knew, his signature line remained blank. Each spring, while preparing the annual financial report, Crundwell transferred city funds into RSED, then issued cashier's checks payable to her personal breeders, her credit cards, sometimes simply to cash. She always left enough in city coffers to pave roads, replace bulbs in the streetlights, pay police overtime, just not enough to dream bigger. Council meetings turned ritualistic. Department heads complained of frozen hiring and broken squad cars. Crundwell, seated beneath fluorescent panels, explained that state tax revenues had fallen again, that proration from Springfield was brutal. Her tone was apologetic yet authoritative, and aldermen nodded, resentful of politics beyond their reach. In 2011, City Clerk Kathy Swanson covered Crundwell's desk while she vacationed in Florida. A stack of bank statements arrived by mail, the envelope marked RSED. Swanson, unfamiliar with the account, opened the flap, scanned the balances and felt her pulse thud. Transfers in the hundreds of thousands flowed out each month to names she recognized from news articles about champion horses. She copied the statements, replaced them carefully, and waded through a weekend spiked with adrenaline. Monday morning she approached the mayor. He flipped through the photocopies, cheeks blanching beneath winter pallor. They decided to call the FBI from a cordless phone in a side office whose blinds rattled in the wind. Agents arrived posing as budget consultants, clipboards in hand, Midwestern polite. 4 months they met covertly with Swanson, requesting more statements, tracing cashier's checks to saddle makers and jewelry stores. Crundwell, oblivious, kept winning. That fall she purchased a sprawling motor coach for $2.1 million. Sleek granite countertops, leather recliners, satellite uplink. She posted photographs online, caption "Living the Dream on the Road." Her accountant in Rock Falls dutifully prepared tax returns, listing farm income and horse show prize money. He never asked how those figures dwarfed a city salary of $80,000. April 17, 2012 began bright, with robins fussing in budding maples outside City Hall. Crundwell settled into her chair, sipped McDonald's coffee, and started reconciling deposits. At 9:45 a.m., 2 FBI agents stepped into the doorway, one tall, one shorter, jackets unbuttoned. They requested a private conversation. She followed them to a conference room scented faintly of copier toner. Minutes later, employees heard the click of handcuffs. Crundwell emerged composed, lips pressed into a thin line, escorted past startled colleagues and down concrete steps to an unmarked sedan. The indictment alleged $53.7 million. Stolen over 22 years, the largest municipal embezzlement in U.S. history. Reporters descended, filling parking spots normally reserved for pickups. Residents felt a collective double vision. The dependable woman who arranged the pet parade float was also the architect of their budget strangulation. Some spoke of betrayal, others muttered admiration for audacity carried off with such Midwestern understatement. As part of forfeiture, U.S. Marshals seized 400 horses, luxury vehicles, a farmhouse with stone fireplaces, even a championship-sized trophy case. An online auction streamed live. Bidders in Texas and Australia clicked refresh while a gavel icon blinked sold. Proceeds returned to Dixon, replenishing reserves, funding long-delayed water main replacements. When the first new squad car rolled into the police lot, officers joked it should bear a decal of a galloping horse. Crundwell pleaded guilty in November, voice barely audible in the federal courtroom at Rockford. She explained she had initially taken funds to cover ranch expenses, planning to repay when sales improved. Success lured her deeper, until withdrawals felt routine, rationalized by the sophisticated care her horses required. The judge listened, unmoved, and sentenced her to 19 years, citing an avalanche of greed. She nodded once, then was led away. In the months after sentencing, Dixon experienced a strange buoyancy. Streetlights glowed brighter, sidewalks were repaired, and the high school band received new uniforms after a decade of patching frayed cuffs. Yet during summer fairs, when horse trailers rumbled past the fairgrounds, townspeople turned their heads, thinking of silver buckles that glittered under stolen dollars. Crundwell today occupies a federal prison camp in Alabama, waking before dawn to feed rescue dogs as part of an inmate program. She writes letters on lined paper, asking about the river, the church raffles, the corn festival. She signs each note with a looping signature once affixed to every check the city wrote. Dixon keeps her name off plaques and brochures, but history clings like river mist. Visitors strolling along the rock sometimes notice a brass statue of Lincoln and read the inscription about integrity. Behind them, City Hall's windows reflect the water's steady current, transparent now, at least for the moment. The lobby of the Lipton Tower on Manhattan's 3rd Avenue felt like a cathedral to prosperity. Polished green marble, a brass-framed fountain, and a hush broken only by the soft thrum of elevators ferrying wealth to higher floors. On the 18th level, behind smoked glass doors etched with the words Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, an orchestra of quiet deception was tuning up. Bernard "Bernie" Madoff, 68 and silver-haired, had built the firm's image on an almost monastic restraint. No flashing screens, no frantic traders, just Persian carpets, muted lamps, and a promise of consistent returns. Clients called him the maestro because his results never missed a beat. 8 to 12% every year, no matter whether Wall Street soared or bled. Doctors from Ohio, duchesses from Monte Carlo, and even the trustees of Hebrew University wired him fortunes and slept soundly. His manner helped them rest. Bernie listened more than he spoke, and when he did answer, it was in a low, confiding rumble, as if the two of you were the only sensible minds left in finance. Yet behind another locked door, this one guarded by a coded keypad and a single melancholy ficus, 2 assistants ran the true business. Their computers held no real trades, only spreadsheets that birthed imaginary ones. At month end, the assistants opened software that backfilled a roster of plausible stock purchases in blue chips like IBM or Pfizer, making it look as though Bernie had divined, weeks ago, the very moment those shares would rise. The profits were fictional, but the paper trail looked tidy. Brokerage statements dripped with reassuring details. To fund withdrawals, fresh money from new investors flowed in, labeled client deposits and shuttled into a Chase account absolutely under Bernie's control. The mechanism was simple. Rob Peter to pay Paul, rob Paula to pay Pierre, and keep the cycle spinning faster than suspicion. Suspicion, however, has ways of whispering at night. In the winter of 1999, a derivatives analyst named Harry Markopoulos received a mandate from his boss: copy Madoff's strategy or prove it's impossible. After 3 afternoons with a legal pad and a Hewlett-Packard calculator, Harry concluded the latter. Statistically, those returns resembled a flat horizon on stormy seas, an impossibility. He compiled an 8-page memo for the Securities and Exchange Commission titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." The document traversed corridors in Washington and vanished into gray filing cabinets. Resources were limited, the SEC said. Besides, Bernie was a former NASDAQ chairman, practically a pillar in the temple. Meanwhile, the maestro carried on, hosting charity galas at the Pierre Hotel, slipping checks to leukemia wards, and mentoring junior regulators who sought his blessing. Ambition fueled him, but also a curious dread. He feared mediocrity more than prison. In country club locker rooms, when someone praised his charity, Bernie's smile flickered. Generosity was a second skin that kept questions away, but he knew it could tear. By 2007, the rumble of the subprime crisis tremored under Wall Street's veneer. Funds of funds, those meta-portfolios that channeled billions to Madoff, began to wobble. Their investors, jittery over collapsing mortgage bonds, wanted cash. Bernie had survived runs before by courting fresh capital from European private banks. Yet even Swiss caution succumbed to panic. Withdrawals outpaced deposits. Each morning the assistants in the back office asked, "How much today?" Bernie answered with a number that grew like a malignant cell. First 90 million, then 200, then 700. He padded across the carpet to the long window above Lexington Avenue, stared at the yellow cabs crawling by, and felt for the first time that the city was shrinking around him. On the 6th of December 2008, his elder son Mark knocked and closed the office door. "Dad," Fairfield Greenwich just called. "They want all $4 billion back." Bernie massaged his temples. "Tell them we'll work something out." But he knew there was nothing left to work with except time, and time's leash shortened by the hour. 4 nights later, in his Upper East Side duplex, Bernie gathered Mark, his younger son Andrew, and his wife Ruth. The apartment, scented with cedar garlands, was draped in holiday silence. Bernie confessed. The order desk was a front, the returns a fiction, and the ledger a yawning hole of $65 billion. He expected shouting. What he heard was wind against the windows. Mark's eyes reddened, not from disbelief but from a childhood trust collapsing in an instant. The brothers contacted legal counsel before dawn. By mid-morning the FBI stood in Bernie's foyer. Special Agent Theodore Cassioppi asked only one question. "Is there an innocent explanation?" Bernie breathed out and said, "There is no innocent explanation." He was arrested wearing monogram slippers. Outside, journalists crowded against police tape, their notebook pages fluttering like white flags in cold December light. The revelation ricocheted through Palm Beach country clubs, Paris salons, and Israeli kibbutzim. Retirees who had thought themselves comfortable now stared at dwindling checking accounts. A Holocaust survivor in Boca Raton sold her condo. A children's hospital in Boston postponed a cancer wing. In synagogue courtyards, congregants spoke his name with a mixture of anger and betrayal, as if a trusted elder had unlatched the temple doors to thieves. During sentencing, Bernie faced Judge Denny Chin in a wood-paneled courtroom. He did not plead for mercy. He said only that he was sorry and that he had lived in a tormented state for many years. The judge called the crime extraordinary evil and imposed 150 years, an arithmetic meant not for release but for history's ledger. As marshals led him away, Bernie did not look at the gallery. The maestro who once conducted silence now marched into a deeper quiet. Back in the Lipton Tower, the fountain still murmured. The brass was polished daily, the elevators glided, and on the vacant 18th floor the carpets retained recesses where desks had stood. Visitors sometimes paused at the empty suite, reading the frosted letters that maintenance crews never bothered to peel off. Behind those letters echoed a cautionary aria. Returns too smooth are likely staged, trust too unquestioning is fertile soil for fraud, and in the marble lobbies of finance, whispers can outlast applause. On the western edge of Munich, in a glass and chrome complex called Wirecard House, Employees began each morning with cappuccinos from a sleek Italian machine. A mural in the lobby showed a credit card arcing through blue sky, its chip catching sunlight like a talisman of effortless commerce. The company promised a cashless future, a frictionless now, and its chief executive, Marcus Braun, repeated the mantra at every shareholder meeting: "Trust is our currency." Braun dressed in black turtlenecks that echoed another Bavarian visionary, and investors found the comparison flattering. Wirecard had clawed its way from a small payment processor for online porn sites to a proud member of Germany's DAX index, worth more than Deutsche Bank. The climb felt miraculous, especially to school teachers in Stuttgart whose pension funds rode the stock. Braun spoke of digital wallets, of billions of transactions streaming like starlight through the company's servers. "We see what others cannot," he said, voice as steady as a metronome. Yet in a corner office 2 floors up, Jan Marsalek, the Austrian chief operating officer, adored seeing what wasn't there at all. He cultivated rumors, whispers of clandestine trips to Libya, of friendships with Russian intelligence, of a private menagerie somewhere near Vienna. Colleagues joked he collected secrets the way children gather marbles. Behind the jokes lingered awe. Marsalek projected easy charm, offered cigars that smelled of cedar and pepper, and could pivot from bandwidth bottlenecks to geopolitics without blinking. When auditors asked a mundane question, he replied with a story so vivid they forgot the original point. The first formal doubts arrived in 2015, folded into a short seller's report that claimed Wirecard's Singapore subsidiary booked phantom revenue. Braun dismissed it as Anglo-Saxon market manipulation, and the German financial watchdog BaFin agreed. Instead of probing Wirecard, it investigated the critics. The stock rebounded. Internally, Marsalek sent celebratory emojis on Slack and promised the best year ever. But skepticism is a stubborn ember. In the spring of 2019, a persistent Financial Times journalist named Dan McCrum published documents hinting that 3 Philippine banks supposedly holding €1.9 billion for Wirecard had never seen the money. Braun responded with a video filmed against a cobalt backdrop. "We are the victim of a massive attack," he declared, eyes unblinking behind rimless glasses. His voice was gentle, paternal, almost soothing, until one realized he never actually addressed the missing cash. Wirecard hired KPMG for an independent review. Weeks turned to months, each new delay explained away by Marsalek with phrases like cross-border complexity and time zone friction. Employees on the accounting floor began noticing tiny tells. A clerk found a signature date that predated the document itself. Another discovered bank confirmations scanned as JPGs, not PDFs, as if someone worried metadata might betray the truth. On June 18, 2020, the truth arrived anyway. KPMG announced it could not verify the €1.9 billion. Wirecard's board issued a terse statement: the cash might not exist. That afternoon, inside a conference room whose whiteboard still displayed last quarter's growth targets, Braun stared at a telephone like a man watching a fuse burn. He phoned the Bank of the Philippine Islands. The answer traveled 10,000 kilometers but felt immediate. "No, we have never held those deposits." The next morning, Braun resigned. He walked out through the lobby mural, credit cards still floating in blue sky, while employees pretended to refresh email. His black turtleneck looked suddenly funereal. Outside, police lights glimmered on the building's windows, reflecting a reality no branding could refract. Marsalek, scheduled to brief regulators that evening, never showed. Flight logs later revealed a private jet lifting from an airfield near Vienna, landing hours later in Minsk. From there the trail dissolved into rumor. Perhaps Moscow, perhaps a mansion on Lake Baikal, perhaps nothing but shadows. In Munich, investigators searched his desk and found a single paperback in the drawer, The Art of Disappearance. Wirecard filed for insolvency within a week, becoming the first DAX company to collapse in modern times. Pensioners in Stuttgart opened envelopes to discover nest eggs cracked. A college in Upper Bavaria froze scholarships. A startup in Dublin lost its payroll float overnight. Trust, it seemed, had a shelf life. During the criminal trial that followed, Braun sat behind glass, face taut but impassive. Prosecutors displayed a slide showing the fictitious Asian subsidiaries. Alalam, Paisi, Orient Growth, names that sounded plausible in the way stage props looked sturdy until touched. Email chains revealed how Marsalek had coached local partners to forge bank balances, offering consulting fees that dwarfed their annual revenue. One witness compared the process to painting a door on a wall and insisting everyone walk through. Braun's defense hinged on ignorance. He claimed Marsalek spun an intricate web he never fully saw. Yet WhatsApp messages told another story. Braun correcting draft press releases, deleting cautious phrases, urging an optimistic tone. The courtroom grew quiet as a single line appeared on the projector. "We need air until December. Then we can fix the rest." It was Braun texting Marsalek 2 months before the cash vanished for good. Judge Marcus Fodish delivered the verdict beneath high ceilings that magnified every syllable. He called the fraud an assault on Germany's financial reputation and sentenced Braun to 13 years. Marsalek remained a ghost, his Interpol notice flickering red online like a small, eternal alarm. Wirecard House still stands on the edge of Munich, its facade immaculate. Startups now rent the offices at a discount, and each morning new employees swipe key cards that once bought entrance to Europe's most elaborate illusion. In the lobby, the mural remains, though someone has added a fine crack across the painted credit card. Visitors seldom notice, yet under certain light the crack gleams like a fault line, reminding anyone who looks closely that trust can be polished, packaged, and sold, until the day it shatters. The new millennium dawned hot in Houston, and from the 34th floor of Enron Center South, the city looked like a model of endless opportunity. Mirrored towers, suburban cul-de-sacs curling into the distance, tankers gliding up the ship channel with their wakes gleaming in the Gulf light. Inside, Jeffrey Skilling paced an office lined with football helmets and lucite trophies engraved "Most Innovative Company in America." The phrase was beginning to feel less like a compliment and more like a dare. Enron had started as a sleepy pipeline operator, but Skilling, together with smooth-talking chairman Ken Lay and boy genius chief financial officer Andy Fasto, had remade it into a self-proclaimed Internet of Energy. The promise was simple yet hypnotic. Deregulated markets would turn electrons and British thermal units into tradable abstractions, and Enron would skim a fortune by brokering that invisible flow. The company leased stadium suites, hired opera singers for Christmas parties, and papered Houston with banners that read "Ask Why." Beneath the banners, Fasto built a maze. He named shell companies after his children, LJM, Chuco, Raptors, and populated them with debt that Enron preferred the world not see. Each special-purpose entity functioned like an attic where unsightly liabilities could be shoved before the neighbors arrived. In exchange for this cosmetic surgery, Fasto received partnership fees that dwarfed his salary. His grin inched wider every quarter, though a tremor twitched at the corners when someone lingered too long over a spreadsheet. Skilling encouraged velocity. "We're a gas company gone high-tech," he told analysts, "so we must be valued like Cisco." Stock options minted millionaires overnight. Secretaries drove BMWs, software coders bought ranches, and middle managers kept framed copies of their brokerage statements the way other people kept diplomas. The culture clung to a single commandment: never let the line dip. The line was Enron's share price, projected in real time on plasma screens near every elevator bank. Yet numbers have a way of hardening into stone. By late 2000, California's power crisis revealed strains that no off-balance sheet partnership could hide. Traders in Enron's Portland outpost joked about creating blackouts: Fat Boy, Ricochet, Death Star, names that sounded like arcade games but translated into elderly couples shivering in dark apartments. Public anger curled upward like smoke, and journalists began asking how a company with only bricks and wires could claim profits larger than Texaco's. In October 2001, Fortune reporter Bethany McLean telephoned Skilling's office. Her question was disarmingly simple: how exactly does Enron make money? Skilling, usually glib, snapped that only a complete idiot failed to understand. After he slammed the phone, aides watched him rub a hand across his temple as if trying to erase the moment. Aides had begun noticing other signs: coffee meetings scheduled at dawn so no one would overhear, a shredder whirring long after assistants had gone home, Fasto stalking the corridor with color-coded binders clutched to his chest. The tremor became a quake on a gray Monday when whistleblower Sharon Watkins delivered an unsigned memo to Lay. "I am incredibly nervous we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals." Lay skimmed the pages, sighed through his nose, and handed them to General Counsel with the air of a man forwarding a minor maintenance request. He still believed charisma could outpace arithmetic. But arithmetic caught up on October 16, when Enron disclosed a mysterious $1.2 billion equity reduction tied to related party transactions. On Wall Street, that phrase translated to run. The plasma screens flickered red. The share price that once hovered at 90 collapsed to 30, then 15. At water coolers, employees refreshed their 401k balances and felt a hollow pop in the chest, as though gravity itself had been revoked. Fasto was fired, though in the atrium he smiled gamely and told a receptionist, "See you soon." He did not see her soon. Federal agents raided his home days later, cataloging artworks and a wine collection labeled Confidence Reserve. Skilling, who had resigned abruptly in August to spend more time with family, retreated behind the gates of a River Oaks mansion. At night he jogged in circles on a private treadmill, CNN muted, the whir of belt the only sound. Thanksgiving arrived, but gratitude was scarce. The company locked employee trading accounts even as Lay urged them to buy more shares, show your faith. He himself sold millions that week. Receptionists who had once priced Caribbean cruises now Googled bankruptcy law. One afternoon the elevators jammed with cardboard boxes, and a young engineer wrote in marker on hers, "Dreams inside, handle gently." On December 2, 2001, Enron filed the largest Chapter 11 in American history. In the lobby, poinsettias drooped under fluorescent lights that no longer felt festive. Security guards collected badges like souvenirs of a vanished civilization. Outside, reporters stood under umbrellas, narrating the downfall in measured tones as rain pooled around the bronze sculpture of intertwined pipes that had symbolized Enron's endless loop of innovation. The water made the metal look as though it were weeping. Trials followed, each more riveting than the last. Fasto, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, described how bankers had lined up to fund his shell games so long as fees flowed. He spoke quietly, almost relieved to be rid of the facade. Skilling, taut and argumentative, insisted the business model was solid, only confidence had failed. Jurors watched him jab a finger in the air, and some felt a twinge of the old magnetism. Yet the spreadsheets on the projection screen were stark. Billions in phantoms, partnerships that bought nothing, sold nothing, existed only to paint a prettier face on debt. Judge Sim Lake pronounced sentences beneath chandeliers that tinkled when the air conditioning kicked on. Fasto received 6 years after a tearful apology. Skilling drew 24, later reduced on appeal, though he still left the courthouse in handcuffs that flashed like dull silver cufflinks. Ken Lay, convicted on 6 counts, never served a day. He suffered a heart attack at his Colorado vacation home, leaving both accusers and defenders to argue whether fate or guilt had stopped his pulse. Today, the once grand Enron complex is rebranded for an oil services firm. The plasma screens are gone, replaced by framed nature prints. But beneath fresh coats of paint, some elevators still pause on the 34th floor with a slight mechanical sigh, as if remembering the weight of unspoken ambition. Visitors seldom notice. Yet janitors say that late at night, when the building empties and the Gulf breeze rattles the ducts, a faint electronic chime echoes in the corridors, the phantom ping of a share price no longer traded, reminding the quiet halls that even in the tallest towers, gravity waits. The swan-gray dawn that settles over Wolfsburg has an industrial hush, broken only by the steady heartbeat of assembly robots inside Volkswagen's vast main plant. On the 15th floor of the Vorstens Bureau, Chief Executive Martin Winterkorn liked to stand by the panoramic window, hands clasped behind his back, watching freight trains glide toward the factory gates. The view reassured him, order on rails. Below, 60,000 employees filed through turnstiles, each wearing the same navy jacket with a small chrome emblem. Das Auto distilled to cloth. Winterkorn ruled by precision. He timed meetings to the minute, corrected subordinates' grammar, even carried calipers in his pocket to measure door gaps on pre-production cars. But deep in basement laboratory E48, a handful of powertrain engineers had discovered a gap he could not close with instruments. Europe's new diesel engines, tuned for performance, exhaled nitrogen oxides well above America's stringent limits. Fixing the chemistry meant slower cars, higher costs, and, worst of all, loss of the U.S. growth story investors expected. A mid-level manager named Jens Hadeler proposed a different fix: software. During formal emission tests, the car sat on a stationary roller. Its steering wheel never moved, its rear wheels never turned. An algorithm could recognize that sterile pattern, switch the engine into an ultra-clean mode for the duration of the test, then revert on real roads to the punchy, fuel-sipping tune drivers adored. In memos, the code was called the acoustic condition. In quieter corners, engineers nicknamed it Der Zauberer, the magician, because numbers that once glowed red now flashed green. Marketing seized the miracle. Slick Super Bowl ads announced clean diesel as the responsible rebel's choice. Shot after shot showed wide-eyed children breathing mountain air while a Jetta purred by like an ethical sports car. Dealerships hung helium balloons and told customers they could save the planet without sacrificing torque. Sales curves bent upward, and in Wolfsburg Winterkorn's smile, rare, thin, appeared more often. Across the Atlantic, professors at West Virginia University loaded a portable analyzer into the trunk of an aging Ford Transit and set off on a 2,000-mile road trip, tailpipes wired to sensors. Sponsored by a small environmental nonprofit, they expected modest discrepancies between lab and highway. Instead, the Volkswagen readings were grotesque, up to 40 times the legal limit. The data felt like a tabloid headline, too lurid to trust. They ran the tests again. Same result. When the findings reached Oliver Schmidt, Volkswagen's liaison to U.S. regulators, he flew to San Francisco carrying a PowerPoint titled Possible Technical Explanations. In a windowless conference room at the California Air Resources Board, he clicked through bar graphs and spoke of altitude, tire friction, driver behavior, anything but software. The regulators listened, unconvinced. "We need the root cause," one said evenly. Schmidt nodded, knowing the root lay buried under layers of obfuscation, shielded by plausible deniability extending all the way to the 15th floor in Wolfsburg. Summer 2015 brought a siege mindset to E48. Engineers held twilight meetings with phones stacked face down, resorting to pencil sketches that were shredded afterward. When someone suggested confessing, another replied, "We have crossed the Rubicon." Yet the river kept rising. By September, U.S. authorities threatened to withhold certification for the new model year. Volkswagen couldn't sell a single 2016 diesel unless truth emerged. On a humid Berlin evening, Winterkorn convened his strategy circle at the Hotel Adlon, its bar scented with polished mahogany and cigar smoke. Presentations spiraled into semantics. Admit irregularities, but not cheating. Promise full cooperation. Reveal nothing self-incriminating. Midnight neared. Winterkorn removed his glasses, massaged the bridge of his nose, and whispered, "Sort it out." The words sounded like an order but also a plea, as though precision itself had betrayed him. 3 days later, on September 18, 2015, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued a terse notice of violation. News tickers lit up. Volkswagen used illegal software to cheat diesel tests. In Frankfurt, the share price plunged before coffee cooled. Mechanics in small-town dealerships stared at the scrolling numbers as if watching a beloved relative fade on a hospital monitor. Customers phoned in disbelief. Some wept, others raged. Trust, once laminated in chrome, warped like cheap plastic. Winterkorn resigned within the week, his statement heavy with conditional verbs. "I am stunned. I was not aware." Prosecutors raided homes, seizing laptops and diaries. In Detroit, Schmidt was arrested at the airport after a vacation, still sunburned from Florida beaches. He would later tell a federal judge, voice shaking, "I was instructed to do this." The judge replied, "And you followed gladly." Volkswagen set aside €30 billion to recall, repair, and placate. Engineers updated the software, dealerships installed new catalytic filters, but no algorithm could roll back the intangible damage. In dinner conversations across Europe, people spoke of Dieselgate the way one speaks of a cracked mirror, disquieted by the reflection of their own willingness to believe. Today, outside the Wolfsburg factory, a landscaped pond reflects the clean lines of the headquarters tower. Visiting schoolchildren feed swans while tour guides recite a future of electric vehicles and carbon neutrality. Yet veteran workers say that on still mornings, if you stand near the loading bay just before shift change, you can hear a faint phantom idle, a smooth hum that was once marketed as the sound of progress, and now lingers like an unanswered question in the air. A pale autumn moon hung above Wolfsburg's factory skyline, the chimneys breathing invisible plumes into the chill. Below, in Building K, lines of diesel engines idled on test rigs, their rhythms oddly soothing like mechanical lullabies. Felix Kessler, a 35-year-old software engineer with an orderly mind and a disordered conscience, watched a readout that showed nitrogen oxide emissions near perfectly flat. He glanced at the exhaust pipe, then at the door. No one else seemed troubled that the numbers looked too good to be real. The data danced within government limits as elegantly as a conductor's baton. Felix shut the screen, pressing the key as if closing a confession. 2 floors up, a polished conference room held a different kind of performance. Martin Winterkorn, Volkswagen's austere chief executive, studied quarterly targets displayed in corporate blue. Europe's regulators were tightening diesel standards, and America, a prized yet skeptical market, would soon demand even lower emissions. Winterkorn's chin tilted toward the ceiling as he spoke of technological supremacy and clean diesel, phrases rehearsed for shareholders and Bundestag members alike. Engineers along the table exchanged fleeting glances. Supremacy sounded glorious, yet physics remained stubborn. Making diesel engines both powerful and pristine required either a chemical miracle or something easier to code. In 2007, a small group within Volkswagen's powertrain division had chosen the easier path. They devised the function, a tidy block of software that read steering wheel angle, barometric pressure, and wheel rotation. If those signals matched a stationary laboratory test, the engine's catalytic systems rose to their most virtuous settings. Out on an open highway, the function relaxed the standards, preserving torque and fuel economy while releasing pollutants at up to 40 times the legal limit. Internally, it was called a slip bandage, a temporary measure said to buy time until the hardware caught up. But time, once bought, rarely settles its invoice. The plan might have remained a ghost in the source code had it not been for a curious study arranged by West Virginia University in 2014. A pair of graduate students rented a beetle green Volkswagen Jetta and a Passat, bolted portable emission sensors to their tailpipes, and drove from San Diego to Seattle. The instrument needles fluttered into the red almost immediately. They thought they had miscalibrated the equipment, recalibrated, and watched the same angry spikes paint the desert air. Their report reached the California Air Resources Board, where analyst Annette Heath folded her arms and frowned at the charts. Either the students were incompetent, she thought, or someone in Wolfsburg had rewritten reality. Back in Germany, Felix felt the first tremors. Emails arrived marked urgent, delete after reading. American regulators were demanding technical explanations, and the function's creators were drafting talking points that described it as a benign auxiliary feature. Felix sat at his kitchen table in Braunschweig, scrolling through the chain on his phone, the lamplight casting oily shadows across the screen. He thought of his toddler daughter asleep in the next room, of playground air he assumed was safe, and of the day he first signed the company credo that pledged responsibility beyond the factory gate. He began to understand how words could be welded into masks. July 2015, Wolfsburg. An internal briefing labeled Stuff Rot, Code Red, assembled legal counsel, senior engineers, and Winterkorn himself. Charts showed impending certification deadlines. Bullet points warned of civil fines topping $18 billion. Winterkorn's voice sliced through the room, "Fix it." Some heard urgency, others menace, but everyone understood disclosure was not on the table. In corridor whispers they compared the crisis to a ship taking water. Patch the hole, keep steaming, hope the passengers notice nothing beyond the deck lights. September 18, A date now engraved in automotive lore, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued a notice of violation. News outlets splashed diesel deception across banners. Volkswagen stock plunged 1/3 in 2 days, evaporating €30 billion of market value. At the Wolfsburg plant gates, workers queued beneath television trucks. A machinist with 30 years service muttered that he had spent careers chasing microns of perfection, only to learn software could erase imperfection with a keystroke. Some talked of betrayal, others of inevitability whenever ambition outpaces ethics. Felix, summoned by external investigators, found himself seated under fluorescent panels much like those above his test rigs. He described the function's logic, how it toggled between dyno and street modes, and how management layers had encouraged solutions that did not slow assembly lines. His words felt both freeing and corrosive, like prying rust off iron and discovering the metal beneath had thinned beyond recovery. Winterkorn resigned within the week, stating he was not aware of any wrongdoing, a phrase parsed by lawyers for its careful tenses. Criminal inquiries bloomed on 2 continents. The U.S. Department of Justice indicted senior engineers. German prosecutors raided apartments at dawn. Plea agreements referenced spreadsheets titled acoustic, code for defeat. Internal memos married to time stamps proved that the deception, once small, had been nurtured like a secret garden. Courts imposed more than €30 billion in fines and buybacks. Winterkorn, charged with fraud, now waits for a trial repeatedly delayed by procedural maneuvers and the slow grind of pandemic courts. He keeps mostly silent, a man who once commanded the world's largest carmaker reduced to measured press statements and the echo of promises about supremacy. Volkswagen rebranded, pledging an all-electric future. ID.3s glide through adverts against sunlit coastlines, green leaves swirling in the slipstream. Yet in certain European villages the smell of diesel lingers, a faint metallic tang on cold mornings, and some drivers glance at their dashboards wondering which numbers they can trust. Felix left the company, lectures occasionally on software ethics, and ends each talk with a modest slide. Complex systems fail when honesty is treated as a variable. The line draws polite applause. Afterward, someone invariably asks if he regrets speaking out. He answers that regret is less useful than breathing clean air, then walks outside to examine the sky. Night settles once more over Wolfsburg. The chimneys still exhale, though filters have been tightened. Moonlight pools and puddles beside the assembly halls, and a solitary security guard watches it ripple, unaware that 7 years earlier those same puddles mirrored a secret burning quietly, its smoke rising unseen into the dark. The first notes of dawn drifted over the Po Valley, turning the tiled roofs of Parma a buttery gold. In the village of Collecchio, the Parmalat headquarters loomed like a modern castle, its facade stamped with an image of rolling pastures and the slogan Buon latte buona vita. Trucks painted with grazing cows rolled through the gates, engines humming like contented bees. To visitors, the scene felt wholesome, almost pastoral. Yet inside the top-floor suite, founder Callisto Tanzi paced with the restless energy of a man haunted by arithmetic. Tanzi had begun in his father's tiny grocery, selling warm bottles of pasteurized milk to neighbors who trusted his shy smile. Over 4 decades he transformed that modest shop into the world's largest dairy conglomerate. Yogurt in Brazil, fruit juice in Australia, sponsorship on AC Parma jerseys. Italians nicknamed him Il Cavalier del Latte, the Milk Knight, a title he accepted with quiet pride. Still, expansion cost money faster than milk spoiled, and by the late 1990s Parmalat's appetites had outgrown its cash flow. Chief Financial Officer Fausto Tana offered a cure that tasted sweet at first sip. Complex bonds, offshore vehicles, a Cayman-registered subsidiary called Bonlat. The name suggested a cheerful calf. In truth, Bonlat was a paper shell whose sole mission was to swallow Parmalat's mounting debt and burp out phantom profits. Each quarter the Cayman entity wired back dividends that existed only as journal entries, yet auditors ticked their boxes. There was, after all, a bank confirmation from Bank of America stating Bonlat's account held €3.95 billion. That letter sat framed on Tana's wall like a talisman. Few noticed the confirmation lacked an official letterhead. Fewer still asked why a dairy company needed a Caribbean piggy bank the size of a small nation's GDP. Analysts, seduced by dividend yield, praised Parmalat's solid fundamentals, while Tanzi accepted standing ovations at shareholder meetings, bowing slightly, eyes lowered as if surprised by the applause. In the summer of 2003, a London hedge fund manager named Mauro Saviotti skimmed Parmalat's balance sheet over espresso at the Savoy. Something bothered him. Capital expenditures seemed meager for a firm boasting endless growth. Where were the new factories, the distribution hubs, the stainless steel vats? He shorted the stock and phoned a reporter at Il Sole 24 or muttering, "There's a hole somewhere under that pasture." Meanwhile, in Collecchio, tension seeped through the air-conditioned corridors. Suppliers demanded earlier payments. Bankers insisted on updated figures. In October, Tanzi convened a steering committee beneath a fresco of cherubs pouring milk from amphorae. He cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he ventured, "we should sell the travel subsidiary to raise liquidity." Silence answered. Everyone knew the travel arm had already been pledged twice as collateral. Tana flipped through a ledger, cheeks glistening. "We can bridge the gap," he murmured. Bridging had become their favorite verb, spanning ever wider chasms with promises spun of accounting silk. But silk frays under heat. On November 11th, Parmalat announced a €150 million bond issue to refinance debt. Ratings agencies balked, demanding proof of bondlets' billions. Fax machines chattered through the night. The next morning, auditors at Grant Thornton stared at a blurry Bank of America reference number that led nowhere. When they dialed Charlotte, North Carolina, a polite voice replied, "We have no record of such an account." News reached Milan's Borsa Italiana before lunchtime. Shares wobbled like unset custard. Television anchors, struggling to reconcile wholesome milk with offshore finance, spoke of strange clouds over Parma. Tanzi retreated to his private chapel, kneeling before a wooden crucifix once blessed by a Vatican friend. He prayed, but numbers are deaf to prayers. Mid-December. An icy fog cloaked the plains. At 6 a.m., Finance Director Luciano del Soldato drove to the office in darkness, headlights cutting tunnels through the mist. Inside, police in navy windbreakers were already setting laptops into evidence bags. Tanzi arrived minutes later, adjusting a camel hair coat. An officer addressed him gently, "Signore, we must ask you to come with us." Tanzi nodded, removed his glasses, and wiped them with a handkerchief as if clearer lenses might show a different morning. The scandal unraveled with astonishing speed. Bank debts hidden, invoices duplicated, inventories inflated. An estimated €14 billion vanished, Europe's largest corporate black hole to date. Elderly bondholders in Medina gasped at evening newscasts. Many had bought Parmalat notes at their local post office, told they were as safe as milk in the fridge. Pensioners queued outside banks clutching passbooks, voices trembling. In Rome's marble courtrooms the following year, Tanzi sat under fluorescent glare, shoulders slumped, answering prosecutors in a near whisper. He admitted siphoning money to prop up family ventures, including an art collection featuring Chagall, Degas, and a particularly ironic Van Gogh still life of apples and a glass of milk. Asked why he hadn't stopped earlier, he replied, "I thought tomorrow would always be better." The courtroom fell silent at the ordinariness of the confession. Not malice, but a dangerous optimism curdled over time. Tana, more defiant, argued that banks had lured Parmalat into exotic derivatives, that auditors ignored red flags because fees were generous. Emails supported his bitterness. One banker wrote, "Let's help our friends in Parma. We can structure around the covenant." The judge listened, lips tight, then reminded the defendant that friendship ends where falsified billions begin. Sentences came down like winter hail. Tanzi received 18 years, later trimmed, Tana 10 and a fraction. Grant Thornton's Italian partners faced suspension, while regulators rewrote rules on audit rotation and offshore disclosure. Yet money lost does not return on paper alone. In Ponte a retired couple sold farmland to cover medical bills once secured by Parmalat bonds. In Sao Paulo, a juice plant worker found overtime slashed as the new management shed assets to survive. Today the company, rescued, rebranded, absorbed into a multinational, still bottles milk under familiar blue cartons. Visitors touring the Parma factory see stainless tanks gleaming, workers in white caps testing lactose levels with digital probes. The guide speaks of quality control, sustainability, the future. But if you linger near the loading bay at dusk, when the valley turns the color of old parchment, you may glimpse a faded poster peeling behind a stack of pallets. Tansy in younger days, cradling a milk bottle like a newborn, eyes shining with impossible certainty. Wind slips through the gap in the poster, lifting one corner. For a moment it almost looks as if the image itself is exhaling, letting go of a dream that was always lighter than the carton in his hand. In the humid dawn of February 23, 1995, the trading room on the 6th floor of Simex House stood eerily empty, computers still logged in, green cursors blinking like sleepless eyes. The absence felt louder than any clamor, for the young Englishman who normally filled the space with brisk commands, Nicholas "Nick" Leeson, had vanished. Outside, Raffles Place was already stirring, hawkers lifting metal shutters, bankers straightening Windsor knots, yet within Barings Bank's Singapore outpost a hush expanded, the first tremor of an approaching collapse. Barings was no ordinary bank. It was the Queen's Bank, financier of the Louisiana Purchase, a 232-year-old pillar of London respectability. Leeson, born in Watford to a plasterer's family, seemed an unlikely bearer of its crest. He joined as a back-office clerk, mastered the minutiae of settlements, and volunteered for every extra assignment until superiors deemed him indispensable. When Barings sought a can-do manager to oversee both trading and operations in Singapore, the equivalent of holding the car's steering wheel and the speedometer at once, Leeson lobbied hard. The promotion granted him a trader's seat on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange (SIMEX), and critically the keys to settle his own trades. At first he was conservative. Small arbitrage bets between Japan's Nikkei futures in Osaka and Singapore, shaving fractions of a point, wiring profits back to London. Colleagues admired his stamina. He drank coffee like water, worked past midnight, phoned Tokyo dealers in fluent jargon. Profits mounted, and each month London cabled congratulations, granting wider limits. Leeson's grin widened accordingly, yet inside bloomed a fear familiar to all who climb quickly, the dread of falling. One afternoon in late 1992, a clerk mislabeled a minor error, a buy instead of a sell. Rather than report the loss, Leeson tucked it into an obscure error account numbered 88888. The digits, auspicious in Chinese lore, felt like a private joke. He vowed to clear the deficit with tomorrow's gains. Tomorrow, however, arrived with fresh volatility, the loss deepened. He doubled his bets, won some, lost more, and soon the account evolved from a hiding place into a parallel universe where losses went to hibernate, presumed temporary. Each successful arbitrage fed London's applause, masking the secret sinkhole. By 1994, account 88888 concealed nearly £150 million in red ink. To recoup, Leeson pivoted from hedged spreads to outright gambles on the direction of the Nikkei. He convinced himself he understood its pulse. If Tokyo fell in morning trading, surely a rebound awaited after lunch. If it rose, fresh momentum would carry it skyward. Risk managers in London received glossy profit reports and happily rubber-stamped larger limits, unaware that the gains existed only on one set of ledgers while losses multiplied on another. Leeson's personal life mirrored the acceleration. He and his wife, Lisa, dined at the Mandarin Oriental, vacationed in Bali, and hosted colleagues at the Tangling Club where gin and tonics glistened in the tropical dusk. Yet even celebratory laughter had an undertone. Leeson's beeper never left the table, emitting staccato summons he alone could decode. On January 17, 1995, the Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe, crumpling highways and rattling markets. The Nikkei plunged. Leeson, long on futures, watched candles of red cascade down his screen. He tripled down, wagering on a dramatic recovery. Instead, after each brief uptick, fresh selling crashed over the index like aftershocks. Losses ballooned past £500 million, more than Barings' available capital. Still he held, convinced that one violent rally would erase the nightmare and crown him hero. Each night he fabricated transfer requests from fictitious counterparties, moving funds from European branches into Singapore to meet margin calls. Fax machines spat confirmations stamped urgent. Treasury clerks in London, trusting the signatures, wired money without hesitation. Baring's liquidity drained like unseen blood. February's first weeks grew frantic. Leeson napped on the office couch, eyes gritty, dreams invaded by candlestick charts. A subordinate noticed his hands trembling as he lifted a coffee mug. "Just too much caffeine," Leeson muttered. The breaking point arrived in the small hours of February 23rd. Standing on the trading floor's balcony, humid air clinging to his shirt, Leeson stared at the nightlit skyline and understood the arithmetic was terminal. The Nikkei had not rebounded. The losses in 88888 had breached £827 million. At that magnitude, no rally could save him. Only confession or disappearance remained. He chose disappearance, leaving a note on his desk. "I'm sorry." He and Lisa boarded a flight to Kuala Lumpur, then another to Frankfurt, pursuers always half a terminal behind. Back in Singapore, Baring's managers opened the hidden account at last and felt the ground tilt. Emergency calls crackled to London, where executives convened in wood-paneled rooms that still smelled faintly of cigar smoke from earlier centuries. Overnight they sought a buyer, any institution willing to assume $1 billion crater for the price of history's oldest merchant bank. No one volunteered. On February 26, 1995, Baring's Brothers and Company petitioned for bankruptcy. Employees exited Bishopsgate carrying boxes beneath the grey London drizzle, passing a brass plaque that had once seemed immutable. Leeson was arrested in Frankfurt 6 days later, his passport flagged. Extradited to Singapore, he faced a trial where prosecutors recited figures that sounded fictional. £827 million, £56 billion in unhedged Nikkei futures exposure. He sat thinner, head shaved to bristles, answering in a flat monotone. Asked why he hadn't stopped earlier, he said, "The losses were too big. I thought one more trade would fix it." The simplicity chilled the courtroom. Ambition and self-delusion needed no exotic motive. Sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi prison, Leeson spent his 20s end in a concrete cell, reading philosophy and enduring colon cancer surgery amid tropical heat. Baring's remains were purchased by ING for £1, the sum ironic enough to pass as satire if it weren't true. Today, Cimex House has a new tenant name, the trading floor remodeled into open co-working pods where fintech startups chase digital fortunes. Yet a security guard who worked through the 90s claims that some evenings, when the lifts have shut down and fluorescent lights hum softly, he can still sense a cold patch near the window where Leeson once paced. The city outside is neon and modern, but inside that silent corner lingers a whisper of spreadsheets, a rustle of desperate possibility, a reminder that even venerable empires can be undone by the quiet click of a single unchecked key. At twilight the Hudson shimmered quartz blue, and on the 34th floor of the Lipstick Building a hedge fund called Galleon pulsed with quiet urgency. The trading floor resembled an elite call center. Headsets, 4-screen rigs, espresso steam, and a hum pitched just below conversation. At the center desk sat Raj Rajaratnam, broad-shouldered, collar open, fingers drumming a syncopated rhythm on his Bloomberg keyboard. He spoke in low bursts, by 200,000 Cisco, dump intel at 1750, as if directing a private orchestra visible only to him. Raj cultivated approachability. He wore knit polos instead of bespoke shirts, greeted receptionists by first name, and kept an open door where junior analysts lined up like parishioners. Yet investors saw something harder in the eyes, a calculation that never powered down. "We're information hunters," he told recruits, voice plush with certainty. "Others read filings, we read the future." The future, it turned out, arrived through carefully tended leaks. A consultant at McKinsey whispered about AMD's earnings beat. A Moody's analyst hinted at credit rating shifts. A classmate from Wharton, now inside Intel, texted chip launch timelines. Each tip traveled the same circuit. Cell phone to Raj, Raj to execution desk, execution to profit measured in 7 digits before lunch. Bonuses followed, stamped with "Thank you for making us the best on heavy cream cardstock." In 2007, a mid-level trader named Rumi Khan placed a jittery call to an old FBI contact after customs flagged her for undeclared jewelry. She offered a bargaining chip. "If you want Wall Street conversations you'll find interesting, start with Raj." The agent, curious, filed a memo. Months passed. Subprime fears mounted like distant thunder. When Galleon reported another stellar quarter, the memo surfaced again. The Department of Justice approved an unusual tactic for a securities case: wiretaps. FBI technicians drilled tiny holes in Raj's office ceiling after midnight, threading microphones the size of guitar picks behind acoustic tiles. They parked black Chevy vans outside the building, aerials folded like praying mantis legs, and waited for market-opening chatter to pour through headphones. What they heard bordered on cinematic. Tuesday, 9:10 a.m. Male voice 1: "Raj, you absolutely sure?" Male voice 2: "Intel source, product pulled forward 1/4. Street doesn't know." Raj, exhaling, "Good. I owe you dinner at per se." Agents filled notebooks with timestamps, ticker symbols, swap sizes. Some nights, sifting hours of audio, they caught glimpses of the man behind the baritone. Raj doted on his son's little league stats, reminisced about Sri Lankan cricket, fretted over rising seawater in Colombo. Then, seamlessly, he pivoted back to spreadsheets, describing potential billion-dollar positions with the blasé intimacy others reserve for weekend plans. Inside Galleon, a few veterans sensed static in the air. Compliance Officer Todd DeLuca noticed Raj had started taking calls on a balcony overlooking 3rd Avenue, pacing tight semicircles like a polar bear in a zoo. DeLuca drafted a memo, reminder, insider information liability, but left it unsent after a partner hinted that paranoia killed morale faster than risk. By 2009, the financial crisis had thinned Manhattan's canyons. Banners once trumpeting IPOs now advertised discounted office space. Galleon paradoxically thrived. A lunch with Rajat Gupta, revered ex-McKinsey chief and Goldman Sachs director, provided Raj with a nugget. Warren Buffett would invest $5 billion in Goldman that night. Raj pivoted from steak to phone beneath the tablecloth. Minutes later, his traders snapped up Goldman shares. By dawn, they booked a windfall while global markets still reeled. The call recording landed on the FBI's desk within hours. Prosecutor Preet Bharara listened twice, hearing not just illegality but audacity, the casual melding of boardroom privilege and street-level hustle. He convened agents in a conference room whose windows framed Ground Zero's cranes. "We move now," he said. At 6 a.m. they wake up rich. By noon they understand consequences. 13 agents assembled outside Raj's Sutton Place apartment on October 16, 2009, donned the shade of cold steel. Inside, Raj stood at the stove whisking eggs, CNBC murmuring in the background. A knock, firm and synchronized. When the door opened, badges flashed like camera bulbs. Raj's wife gasped. He set down the whisk with deliberate calm. "Is this about trades?" he asked, voice steadier than his pulse. Handcuffs clicked. The moment sounded oddly delicate against marble tile. Downtown, cameras flanked the FBI van as if covering a movie premiere. Viewers at home saw a man in jogging pants and fleece escorted across wet pavement, expression unreadable, equal parts fatigue, calculation, and a sliver of something else, maybe relief. Galleon employees filed into a hastily scheduled meeting where interim managers repeated legal talking points. Some cried, others opened LinkedIn on muted screens. One analyst stared at the empty swivel chair by Raj's desk, still indented, and felt the uncanny hush after hurricane winds stop. The trial 9 months later unfolded in a walnut-paneled courtroom smelling faintly of copier toner and anticipation. Jurors heard tapes. Raj thanking tipsters, tipsters citing board calls, everyone speaking a dialect of half-sentences, stock codes, and trust. Defense lawyers argued the calls reflected astute research, not theft. Prosecutors countered with the phrase information that cannot be Googled. Midway through, Anil Kumar, Raj's business school friend, took the stand, voice trembling as he admitted trading humanity for consulting fees slipped in newspaper envelopes. Closing arguments echoed like dueling sermons, one lauding free markets, the other warning of corrosive rot. The jury deliberated 11 hours. Guilty on all 14 counts. Sentencing day, Judge Richard Holwell described a brazen, pervasive misuse of inside information and imposed 11 years, the longest ever for such a crime at the time. Raj swallowed once, adjusting cuffs on a suit no tailor would see again. After the verdict, Barara faced reporters beneath courthouse columns. Today's message, he said, is clear. When privileged professionals corrupt markets for personal gain, we will listen, we will follow, and we will act. Microphones captured every syllable. In trading floors across Manhattan, headsets suddenly felt heavier. Galleon's sign came down quietly that winter. A fintech startup now occupies the space, bright with beanbags and kombucha taps. New hires pass a patch of ceiling where wires once hid, unaware of its phantom technology. Yet a night janitor, on shift since the Galleon days, swears that after 2 a.m., amid the hush of robotic vacuums, he sometimes hears the faint click-click of a headset left off the hook, as if conversations on forbidden frequencies still bounce between the glass towers, waiting for someone to pick up. The Thames looked pewter under a low February sky, and from the 22 floor of UBS's Lime Street office its sluggish current resembled liquid metal, valuable, malleable, controlled. Tom Hayes, trim and boyish behind round glasses, sipped instant coffee while watching the seconds pulse on his Rolex. 10:57 a.m. 3 minutes until the LIBOR submission window opened. 3 minutes to shape the benchmark that underpinned mortgages in Manchester, credit cards in Kansas, and trillions in swaps no commuter on the district line had ever heard of. Hayes worked Tokyo hours but reported to London and traded New York. He kept 3 phones within reach, each vibrating with the staccato life of faraway trading pits. On Bloomberg Chat his screen filled with friendly nudges. Bro, need a low 3M yen fix today, can you help? Mate, huge reset coming, any love on the 6 month? He replied with emojis and shorthand. No worries, we'll try, gotcha. The language felt collegiate, almost silly, yet behind each wink lay millions in potential profit. Hayes's desk ran the short-term interest rate book for UBS Asia. A basis point nudge meant a private harvest. His internal nickname, Rain Man, was half flattery, half warning. A mind that could see decimal shifts the way others saw weather changes. The method was simple, its elegance unsettling. Each bank on the LIBOR panel estimated what it would pay to borrow unsecured funds. Most days, traders like Hayes whispered to their own submitters, nudging them to shade the guess up or down. A single banker's input barely moved the calculated average, but a coordinated chorus, spread across UBS, Citigroup, RBS, and a sprinkle of broker friends, could tilt the line enough to matter. On quiet days the difference slipped beneath regulators' radar, registered only as the dull hum of routine finance. At 10:59 a.m. Hayes messaged his Zurich submitter, tiny bit lower if you can, have big resets, promise sushi next trip. A green check mark confirmed delivery. Seconds later the submitter typed, copy, going 56. Hayes exhaled. At 11 hours and 35 seconds the official 3-month yen LIBOR printed 1/4 of a basis point below yesterday's level. In a world of 9-figure positions, that sliver equaled a mid-6-digit win. He logged the profit with a brisk keystroke, then forwarded a note. Thanks, legend. Dinner's on me. Trust for now still held. Across the city, on Canary Wharf's 31 floor, analyst Tracy McDermott at the Financial Services Authority wrestled with a spreadsheet that refused to balance. She traced anomalies in dollar LIBOR during the 2008 liquidity crunch. Submissions clustered suspiciously tight, as if separate banks shared one brain. An internal email surfaced in Discovery, keep it low, Governor wants calm. McDermott highlighted the line in red, heart ticking faster. Officially, LIBOR was a mirror of real market funding. Unofficially, it appeared more like a funhouse glass, bending reality to soothe nerves and boost bonuses. In Washington, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission sniffed similar air. Investigators subpoenaed 13 banks and a handful of broking desks. Digital vaults opened, spilling chats laced with smiley faces and lines such as, "Don't forget the 1 p.m. London set. Need it high today or we're toast." Sarcasm, maybe, but also confession. Lawyers circled like gulls. Back in Tokyo, Hayes played down the chatter. Everyone does it, he told a junior, shrugging. The culture validated him. Managers cared only for profit. Compliance memos asserted LIBOR integrity, but arrived and signed. In pubs near Shimbashi, rival traders swapped tips alongside edamame, each aware of the game yet unwilling to break the circle. Ambition blurred into normalcy. The first real crack appeared in spring 2010 when UBS Compliance forwarded a bland request. Please preserve all communications relating to LIBOR. Hayes' pulse skipped. He scrolled through years of chats. So many inside jokes now reading like ransom notes against the future. He archived some, deleted others, unsure which act counted as the bigger crime. July 2011. Barclays admitted manipulating LIBOR and paid a record fine. The city buzzed with schadenfreude, but Hayes sensed danger accelerating toward him like a narrowing tunnel. He met a friend at a coffee kiosk beneath St. Paul's and spoke in half sentences. If they come, the chats, context matters. The friend, older and weary, replied, context won't save you when the public learns their mortgage rate was someone's lunch bet. In December, unmarked cars rolled up outside UBS offices in London, Zurich, and Tokyo. Agents from the Serious Fraud Office and the U.S. Justice Department synchronized raids like a global drumbeat. Hayes was in his Wimbledon rental, folding laundry when officers knocked. They were polite, almost apologetic, yet precise. Passport, laptop, phone, please. One agent read the charge: conspiracy to defraud by manipulating LIBOR. Hayes nodded as though recognizing an overdue bill. Bail hearings followed, paparazzi flashes bouncing off rain-slick courthouse steps. Headlines coined him the £1 billion trader, a figure both inflated and irrelevant. The scandal's true cost was public faith. Governments calculated that even microshifts had siphoned uncountable sums from pension funds, small businesses, and municipal budgets. Trial commenced in 2015 at Southwark Crown Court. The prosecution projected chat logs on a theater-sized screen. Jurors read lines aloud, their incredulity filling the oak-paneled room. Mate, send 3-month hire. Need a winner to pay for my Ferrari. Haha, done. Lunch. Senior managers knew, tacitly encouraged, even rewarded the practice. But the emails lacked subtlety, they oozed intent. One morning, Hayes took the stand, voice thin, hands folded. He spoke of a culture where success was measured minute by minute, where a missed fix could tarnish a year. He closed with a sentence that wavered midair. I thought I was playing by the rules everyone used. After 10 days of deliberation, the jury returned, guilty on 8 counts. Judge Jeremy Cook stated, your conduct was deliberate, sustained, and dishonest, and sentenced Hayes to 14 years, later reduced on appeal. As guards led him away, Hayes glanced once at the public gallery. No smiles, no emojis, just the plain faces of citizens whose interest rates had danced to his unseen tune. Regulators overhauled LIBOR governance, installing transaction-based methods and criminal penalties. Yet reputations proved harder to recalibrate. In small accounting firms across Britain, clients asked auditors, is this number real or another LIBOR? Trust had acquired a hairline crack, visible under certain light. Today, the benchmark persists, slimmed and scheduled for retirement, replaced by risk-free alternatives with dull acronyms. UBS's Lime Street floor has been redesigned into collaborative pods, and new hires scan barista menus where Hayes once typed futures codes. Late evenings, a janitor wiping fingerprinted glass swears he sometimes hears a phantom ping at 10:57 p.m., the ghost of an instant message chasing one last microedge before the window closes forever. The glass walls of the Theranos headquarters on Page Mill Road glittered at sunrise, mirroring the sycamore-lined hills that framed Silicon Valley like a promise. Inside, the reception area smelled of jasmine candles and new circuitry, a curated blend meant to suggest both spa and laboratory. Visitors signed non-disclosure agreements on iPads while a looping video displayed a single crimson bead of blood traveling through animated microchannels, the company's red square logo pulsing beneath a soothing piano score. At the top floor, founder Elizabeth Holmes strode barefoot across carpet the color of desert sand, black turtleneck hugging her small frame, blonde hair twisted into a rope. She spoke seldom before 10 a.m. When she did, her voice dropped into a baritone that unsettled new employees but reassured investors. "We're not an iteration," she liked to say, "we're a revolution." The revolution fit neatly on a lab slide. A finger prick, a few microliters, and hundreds of diagnostic results returned in the time it took to order coffee. The promise dazzled retirees fearful of needles, generals dreaming of battlefield triage, and drugstore chains hungry for foot traffic. Yet beneath the frosted glass lay rooms partitioned by secrecy. Engineers on the first floor tinkered with Edison devices, boxy black machines the size of toaster ovens, yet never saw the chemical formulations upstairs. Chemists upstairs never glimpsed the velvet-lined demo room where visiting dignitaries watched choreographed test runs. Everything depended on silos, each stacked like a Jenga tower whose overall stability no single player could judge. A former Apple designer named Avi joined to perfect the device's sleek shell. On day 4 he asked an innocuous question: "Where's the cooling system for the reagent carousel?" A project manager answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes: "That's handled." When Avi pressed, he received an invitation to a meeting that never appeared on his calendar. He learned quickly that curiosity could shorten contracts. Meanwhile, in a windowless corner of the basement, lab associate Erica Chung clicked through spectrometer readouts that refused to line up. Control samples wandered across expected ranges like lost tourists. She logged deviations, each flagged yellow, then red. Her supervisor, eyes rimmed with fatigue, leaned in and whispered, "Just repeat until it lands in spec." Erica nodded, heart thudding. Repetition felt less like science and more like roulette. Investor money rained in. First millions from venture icons, then hundreds of millions from scions of political dynasties, culminating in a valuation of $9 billion that crowned Holmes the youngest self-made female billionaire. She decorated conference rooms with framed quotes from Edison, Da Vinci, Yoda, "Do or do not, there is no try," and installed bulletproof glass around her office. Guards in inconspicuous polos paced the hall, hollering code walkthrough whenever non-employees strayed near labs. Skepticism appeared as faint drizzle, then steady rain. In late 2013, Alan Bean, the departing lab director, emailed Holmes a 12-point memo outlining irregularities: failed proficiency tests, unvalidated hardware swaps, diluted blood samples run on third-party Siemens analyzers while clients believed Edison did the work. Holmes called it noise and scheduled an all-hands to recommit the team to mission focus. Bean left, signing a separation agreement that muzzled him under threat of ruinous legal fees. The drizzle turned storm in February 2015. John Carreyrou, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, received a tip: the box doesn't work. Carreyrou built a mosaic from fragments: testimony from Bean, whispers from ex-employees, SEC filings buried in clerical dockets. When he phoned Theranos for comment, legal counsel David Boyes, a litigator famed for decibels and victories, threatened consequences. The intimidation seemed odd. It also confirmed Carreyrou's hunch that the truth was brittle. Holmes went on the offensive, booking an interview with Mad Money. Bathed in studio lights, she told Jim Cramer that Theranos technology was the most important thing humanity has ever built. Her voice carried the gravity of moon landings. The stocky host nodded, dazzled. Shares didn't exist, Theranos was private, but confidence, the real currency, surged anew. Yet numbers kept misbehaving. Walgreens pharmacists called Theranos hotlines daily, reporting vitamin K tests reading 0 for living patients, liver enzymes yo-yoing within hours. Each complaint traveled a feedback loop that ended in silence. Inside the lab, Erica Chung crouched over a centrifuge and felt her tolerance snap. She copied data to a thumb drive, resigned, and typed a letter to federal regulators. Days later, in a beige FDA office, she described test runs rerouted to Siemens machines when VIP clients visited. The regulator listened, pen tapping, expression neutral. The tap echoed louder than any threat she'd feared. October 2015, 3 a.m. federal inspectors arrived unannounced, ID badges swinging. In the hallway, a compliance officer dialed Holmes, voice quavering, "They're here." Upstairs, Holmes paced barefoot, calculating variables. Sunrise found her smiling at investigators, offering espresso from a mahogany cart. She spoke of revolution again, but this time her baritone lacked resonance. It sounded like an algorithm searching for the next best phrase. The inspectors issued a scathing report: unreliable controls, unqualified staff, patient risk, immediate jeopardy. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services imposed sanctions, banning homes from owning or operating a lab for 2 years. Investors protested, some filed quiet lawsuits. Others held on, hypnotized by her conviction even as the stage lights dimmed. In March 2018, the SEC charged Holmes and former President Sunny Balwani with massive fraud. She settled without admitting wrongdoing, surrendered voting control, and paid a token fine. But the criminal probe pressed on. 2 years later, federal indictments alleged wire fraud and conspiracy, the maximum penalty overshadowing even her hyperbole. Courtroom sketches captured her seated behind counsel, eyes focused on a point no one else could see. The trial, delayed by pandemic, began in the fall of 2021. Prosecutors paraded lab workers, oncologists, wounded investors. Defense counsel painted Holmes as a young visionary undone by over-optimism, quoting Silicon Valley's mantra, "Fail fast." Carreyrou sat in the gallery, notebook steady. Jurors leaned into audio of Holmes assuring the Department of Defense that Edison could detect bioterror pathogens. After 7 days of deliberation, the verdict arrived: guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Sentencing followed, 11 years and 3 months. The judge cited a stark betrayal of medical trust. Holmes blinked slowly, tears gathering but refusing to fall. The sheriff's deputy touched her elbow. She nodded, rose, and walked down a corridor that smelled of old varnish and consequence. Theranos signage came down. A biotech incubator now leases the space, its lobby filled with ethically sourced succulents. Engineers huddle over CRISPR rigs where Edison shells once collected dust. Some evenings, custodians claim, the automatic blinds malfunction, descending at twilight without command. Through the slats, they glimpse the hills beyond Page Mill, their outline tinged red by the setting sun. A color reminiscent of a single drop of blood, bright, beautiful, and never as transparent as it first appears. The fog parted over Market Street just long enough for sunlight to strike the red stagecoach emblem above Wells Fargo Center, a granite monolith whose lobby smelled faintly of leather and polish. At 7:15 a.m., branch manager Clara Reyes rode the elevator to the 9th floor, thumb tracing the etched brass of her employee badge. A laminated poster inside the car proclaimed the mantra of the year, 8 is great. Bank shorthand for selling each customer 8 products, from checking to credit cards to identity protection plans they had never asked for. Clara believed in targets. Ambition had lifted her from a teller window in Fresno to this corner office with partial bay view. Yet lately the targets felt predatory, like carnivorous plants luring flies. Regional calls opened with applause tracks piped through speakerphones as executives praised cross-sell heroes. One morning the division president, Carrie Tolstedt, chirped, "We are a solutions company. Customers just don't know all the solutions they need." The line drew laughter, but Clara noticed the laughter was thin. Downstairs, personal banker Luis Martinez logged into the ancient sales tracking software, his stomach a tight fist. The dashboard glowed amber. His weekly quota stood at 35 units with only 19 sold, each unit a newly opened account or upsell. Failing meant another coaching session in the glass room. 2 managers, 1 employee, no exits until assigned improvement plan. Luis glanced at the lobby clock, 8:58 a.m. 2 minutes until doors opened and the hunt began. By noon the lobby buzzed with ordinary errands. Retirees depositing pension checks, a college sophomore cashing birthday money, a florist requesting change in quarters. For each, Luis launched the same script. While you're here, let's make sure you're maximizing benefits. If they hesitated, he toggled to a new screen and with 3 swift clicks, created a savings account, then a second checking account to qualify for a promotional interest rate he failed to mention was temporary. He slipped brochures into envelopes like apology notes he hoped no one would read. In the Los Angeles back office center, call center rep Janelle King processed cancellations. She noticed a pattern. Customers insisted they never authorized the products. She flagged a supervisor who shrugged. "Probably forgot," he said. "Move on." Janelle compiled an unofficial spreadsheet anyway. Dates, account numbers, zip codes. After a month the row count hit 600. The same numbers surfaced in a cubicle 3,000 miles away at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Analyst Marcus Chin examined spikes in overdraft fees triggered by low balance accounts customers claimed they never opened. He traced the items back to Wells Fargo, cross-referenced internal whistleblower emails, and felt a chill. The data implied not isolated misconduct but systemic creation of ghost accounts, millions perhaps. In San Francisco, autumn arrived with crisp mornings and anxious hearts. Quarterly town hall meetings once held in cheerful auditoriums moved to live-streamed events, easier to mute uncomfortable questions. CEO John Stumpf beamed from a stage adorned with sunflowers and promised cross-sell momentum. Behind the stage, screens displayed charts ascending like rockets. Below those lines lay the quiet exhaustion of 5,000 branches urging employees to pull rabbits from hats. Clara's branch scheduled morning motivation at 7 o'clock sharp. On the first Tuesday of September, her district manager distributed a list of underperformers. Luis's name glared second from top. After the meeting, Luis cornered Clara, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't hit these numbers without opening accounts customers don't need." Clara inhaled. She wanted to say "I know." Instead, she quoted policy, "Find solutions that delight." Luis lowered his eyes. A small betrayal passed between them, wordless. That weekend, Janelle emailed Marcus Chin from a personal account, attaching her spreadsheet. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but you need to see this." Chin opened the file, cell borders marching across the screen like evidence at roll call. He sent it to Enforcement Counsel with a single sentence, "This is the systemic case we feared." On September 8, 2016, regulators dropped the anvil. Wells Fargo would pay $185 million in fines for creating 1.5 million fraudulent deposit accounts and 565,000 credit cards. Headlines roared, evening news looped footage of angry customers, and social media feeds boiled with images of shredded Stagecoach logos. Inside Clara's branch, televisions muted, staff stared at one another as if sharing a secret suddenly shouted in public square. Stumpf appeared before the Senate Banking Committee 2 weeks later, suit immaculate, voice subdued. Senator Elizabeth Warren leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You squeezed your employees to the breaking point so you could drive up the stock price and put hundreds of millions of dollars in your own pocket," she said. Stumpf blanched. Cameras captured every twitch. He spoke of regrettable actions, claimed the culture was misaligned. Few bought the phrasing. Tolstedt, lionized months earlier, resigned with a pension package larger than most lifetime earnings. Public outrage turned her golden parachute into a burning effigy. Back in San Francisco, Clara gathered her team for an emergency huddle. The quota spreadsheet was gone, replaced by a temporary moratorium on sales goals. She apologized for pressures she had echoed. Some bankers wept, not from relief but from fatigue finally allowed to surface. Luis stared at his hands, recalling each forced click, each unnecessary card mailed to a bewildered address. He asked if the bank would contact customers to close the ghost accounts. Clara didn't know. Years later, the branch still stands on Market Street, but 8 product targets are folklore spoken in half-joking whispers. Customers now receive printouts requiring signatures for every new service, and auditors visit unannounced, their presence a living reminder of fragile trust. On quiet afternoons, when foot traffic ebbs and sunlight slants through high windows, Clara sometimes catches her reflection in the plexiglass partition. A manager older, wiser, still believing in service yet keenly aware that numbers, once unleashed without conscience, can turn honest work into a labyrinth of quiet harm. And in an archived Senate video viewed by ethics trainers, Stumpf's uneasy swallow lingers on pause. A single frame capturing the moment ambition, unchecked, crossed the faint line between growth and greed, leaving even the proud stagecoach without horses to pull it forward. The January sky above Paris's La Défense district was the color of wet slate, a mirror to the mood inside Société Générale's glass monolith. Jérôme Kerviel, a 30-year-old trader from a modest Breton village, walked the trading floor with quiet confidence. No tailored arrogance clung to him. He favored off-the-rack suits and the thin grin of someone still surprised to be here at all. Yet behind his unassuming posture, whole continents of risk were shifting. Risks no one else could see because he had buried them beneath layers of forged emails and canceled tickets. His desk, littered with espresso cups and color-coded spreadsheets, looked no different from those around it. The difference lay in the numbers. Kerviel had begun with small side bets, hedges that netted a few extra euros and earned him nods from seniors who rarely remembered his name. Praise, he discovered, was a drug, mild at first, then ravenous. Each time he booked a tidy profit, he felt himself edge closer to visibility, to some unspoken inner circle where bonuses whispered of yachts. When the bank's control systems noticed positions that exceeded limits, Kerviel invented counter trades on German exchanges, trades that never existed outside his keyboard. Compliance staff, overwhelmed and under-resourced, ticked their boxes and moved on. A false confirmation here, a backdated fax there, paper shields that looked real enough under fluorescent light. By the winter of 2007, the notional size of Kerviel's hidden bets topped 30 billion euros, a sum larger than the bank's own market value. He told himself he would unwind them after the next uptick, skim the profit, restore the ledger to innocence. But markets in December drifted sideways, indifferent to his timetable. He doubled down, layering new positions over old like tarpaulin over damp wood, hoping weight would keep the rot from view. Across the floor, risk manager Claire Paquette noticed a faint anomaly, gains booked against trades she could not trace in the clearing system. She fired off a polite email, copying a supervisor who was already knee-deep in end-of-year reporting. The supervisor sighed, flagged it for review, and opened a fresh spreadsheet. January bonuses depended on closing the quarter, not unraveling the odd thread. Kerviel spent Christmas alone in Paris, wandering the embankments while tourists snapped photos of lights along the Seine. He dialed voicemail repeatedly, half expecting a frantic message from the bank, half dreading it. Silence became permission. On New Year's Eve he keyed in fresh orders worth billions, his fingers moving faster than reflection. Fireworks boomed over the river. He barely heard them. The first real tremor arrived on Thursday, January 17, 2008. European markets shuddered on fears of a U.S. recession, and Kerviel's colossal long positions began bleeding red. Losses climbed past 1 billion euros by mid-morning. He concocted hasty offsets, but the volume triggered automatic alerts. An email from compliance landed like a stone. Please provide documentation for the following trades by close of business. For 6 hours he tried to plug the dam, forging new confirmations, repurposing old ones, phoning a junior in back office and insisting a glitch had erased legitimate records. The junior, eager to be helpful, reopened closed files. It bought him a night's sleep, but nothing more. On Sunday evening, Jean-Pierre Mustier, head of investment banking, convened a discreet meeting. Screens projected columns of raw exposure, euro 49 billion net. Silence pooled in the room. Finally, the CFO spoke, voice low as church bells. Either this is a systems error or we are staring at the biggest rogue position in banking history. Security badges were deactivated at dawn. Kerviel, summoned to a glass conference room, faced 3 executives and a lawyer. He did not run. He almost looked relieved. In a calm voice he described the mechanics. The fictitious counterparties, the looped confirmations, the false hedges. I wanted to make the desk money, he said, as if confession might serve as mitigation. They listened, stunned less by criminal cunning than by the ordinariness of his tone. The bank moved to unwind the trades as Asian markets opened, selling futures in frantic waves that worsened the global slide. By Wednesday the loss crystallized. 4.9 billion euros, a wound deep enough to rattle the French economy. Outside, television vans ringed the plaza, antennas pointing skyward like accusatory fingers. Inside, colleagues replayed every memory of Kerviel. The polite nods, the shared jokes about provincial accents, the night he bought cheap beer after a winning day. Each recollection now felt tainted, as though they should have noticed the tremor beneath the floorboards. Trust, once ambient like office air, turned viscous and thin. French police escorted Kerviel through a side entrance, cameras flashing. Reporters shouted, "Pourquoi?" What? He shrugged, cuffs glinting. His lawyer later argued that the bank had benefited from earlier illicit gains and turned a blind eye until the tide reversed. Prosecutors pressed charges of breach of trust and forgery. The public, reeling from mortgage headlines abroad, debated whether he was a criminal mastermind or a scapegoat for corporate greed. Société Générale CEO Daniel Boughton appeared before Parliament, face gray under television lights. He spoke of extraordinary fraud and isolated failure, phrases engineered to fence the damage. Lawmakers questioned controls, auditors, bonuses. Boughton's answers were firm but unconvincing. The bank's shares slid with each televised hour. Meanwhile, in Ploemur, Kerviel's mother closed her shutters against reporters. Her son had always been disc rep, she told a local priest, never a rule breaker. She pictured him as a boy assembling model sailboats, patient with tiny rigging. Now the national papers painted him as a pirate who steered a galleon of debt into a storm. Weeks later, employees gathered in the cafeteria for a somber briefing. Posters of teamwork still adorned the walls, their slogans suddenly ironic. A compliance officer urged vigilance. A traitor muttered that vigilance didn't earn carry. But something had shifted. Conversations grew hushed, emails more formal. An invisible cord of suspicion wound through every department, binding them in wary solidarity. Kerviel was eventually sentenced to prison and ordered to repay the full 4.9 billion euros, a Sisyphean sum that underscored the moral rather than practical judgment. Appeals dragged on for years, numbers whittled down, but the scar on the bank's name remained. Late at night, cleaning crews polished the marble foyers of La Défense. The trading floor, quiet at last, reflected ceiling lights onto rows of dark screens. Somewhere beneath that polished calm lingered the memory of unsanctioned trades, blinking like phantom quotes. And in that hush, one could almost hear the question that still unsettled regulators and rookies alike. How much risk can hide in plain sight when the disguise is ordinary enough to trust? Evan McAllister's corner office on the 24th floor of Glencourt Energy overlooked the lazy bend of the Houston Ship Channel, a view he once compared to a river of income. For a decade the company had posted quarter after quarter of record profits, each announcement accompanied by Evan's trademark, almost bashful grin at the investor podium. Analysts praised him as the quiet visionary of the natural gas revolution. Under the warm Texas sun, his rise felt inevitable, almost fated, and no one wanted to spoil the optimism with awkward questions. Yet questions did exist. They collected in the head of Mara Delgado, a mid-level accountant who preferred numbers to people and coffee to conversation. Mara noticed that the debt schedule in the internal books never quite matched the one released to shareholders. It was a tiny mismatch, $5 million at first, then 10, easy to dismiss as rounding in a $15 billion enterprise. Still, she saved every version of the spreadsheets on a thumb drive, a quiet ritual performed at dusk when the bullpen emptied and the motion-activated lights clicked off row by row. Evan, for his part, cultivated an air of gentle detachment. He spent his mornings pacing the glass walkway that connected the executive suite to the private gym, murmuring into a headset about virtual pipelines and synthetic capacity. To younger employees the jargon sounded like the future. To board members it sounded like money. No one paused to ask what exactly a synthetic pipeline was, or how it could earn 20% returns in a market where actual pipe and steel projects struggled to break even. On a humid August evening, Glencourt announced a dazzling new partnership with a Swiss commodities bank. The press release promised an influx of capital, lower risk, and an innovative accounting treatment that would unlock shareholder value. Evan spoke softly, almost soothingly as cameras flashed. In the audience, Mara clutched a legal pad and felt a chill. The so-called partnership looked, to her eyes, like a loan in everything but name, yet the liability never showed up on the balance sheet. Somewhere amid the footnotes, risk had been described as revenue and nobody blinked. Weeks turned into quarters and the mismatches grew. 5 million became 50, then 200. Glencourt's stock price soared all the same, buoyed by conference call promises of overseas expansion. Evan bought a ranch west of Austin and an abstract sculpture that resembled a looping Mobius strip. He liked to say it symbolized infinite growth. At holiday parties he remained gracious, even humble, serving bourbon himself and asking interns about their families. His gentle drawl and steel-rimmed glasses projected honesty, and people wanted to believe. Mara finally confided in Theo Price, a careful auditor from the external firm whose tidy spreadsheets mirrored her own. Late one night they compared ledgers under the harsh light of an empty conference room. What emerged was a latticework of special-purpose vehicles, shell companies that bought and sold energy contracts to one another at pre-agreed prices, booking immediate profit while hiding obligations deep in unpublished subsidiaries. In plain language, Glencourt recorded revenue on deals that would not bring real cash for years if ever. All the while liabilities sat off the books, growing like weeds behind a manicured hedge. Theo urged caution. Careers had been crushed for less. He suggested anonymous inquiries, quiet nudges to the SEC. Mara nodded but felt a curdled resolve. She remembered her father's hardware store, how he balanced his register each night down to the cent, insisting that money behaves if you treat it honestly. The thought that billions could vanish through a few euphemisms struck her as obscene. Meanwhile, Evan grew restless. Market reporters whispered about stalled overseas permits, and one investigative journalist asked for an interview about the Swiss partnership. In the boardroom, Evan stayed placid, yet his private emails dripped with urgency. Sell marginal assets, accelerate contract rollovers, find fresh capital. The empire required constant feeding, and new deals were starting to cost more than they earned, like borrowing one credit card to pay another. The collapse began not with a revelation but with a rumor. A short-selling firm released a terse report titled Glencourt's House of Paper. It questioned the timing of profits and pointed to the ballooning, though undisclosed, debt in certain Cayman entities. The stock dropped 8% before lunch, 20% by the closing bell. Analysts demanded clarity, hedge funds demanded collateral. Evan appeared on television, hands clasped, assuring viewers that our fundamentals remain strong. His measured tone, once comforting, now felt rehearsed, even hypnotic. Inside headquarters, panic hummed beneath polite greetings. Printers churned, shredders whirred. Mara and Theo forwarded their documentation to regulators, attaching a note that began, "We believe immediate action is warranted." They were not alone. A junior trader, worried about personal liability, had already handed over emails detailing fabricated energy price curves. The walls were closing in from multiple angles, a quiet siege advancing on polished marble floors. When the SEC subpoena arrived, Evan retreated to his office, closing the frosted glass door. Through the pane he could be seen staring at the skyline, as if searching for the familiar curve of the ship channel through a gathering fog. By week's end, Glencourt restated 4 years of earnings, revealing billions in hidden debt. The stock fell to pennies, retirement funds evaporated, and the Mobius sculpture was carted away by liquidators, its promise of infinity reduced to polished scrap. Evan surrendered to federal marshals one October dawn, stepping into the humid Houston air in the same gray suit he had worn during triumphal press conferences. Reporters shouted questions about remorse, about the betrayed employees, about the families who tied their futures to phantom profits. Evan said nothing. He merely adjusted his glasses as though clearer vision might change the scene before him. In a smaller office 2 floors below, Mara packed a cardboard box with her belongings, a ceramic mug, a calculator, a photo of her parents at the hardware store. She felt no triumph, only a muted sadness, like the hush that follows a storm tearing through familiar streets. Trust, once fractured, does not mend easily. Yet she hoped that somewhere in another firm, someone would remember Glencourt's fall and pause before turning risk into revenue with a keystroke. She powered down her computer, slipped the thumb drive into her pocket, and walked toward the elevator, the overhead lights flickering off behind her, one by one. The offices of WirePay AG rose like brushed steel monoliths above a quiet industrial park on the edge of Munich. Every morning, employees stepped through glass doors etched with the company's slogan, "Trust, Transact, Transform," and felt as if they were entering the future. Digital payment volumes were doubling each year, the share price had climbed 12-fold in a decade, and the CEO, Marcus Braun, was hailed in talk show studios as Germany's answer to Silicon Valley. Investors loved the narrative, a homegrown fintech champion muscling past the lumbering old banks. At the center of the storm stood the elusive chief operating officer, Jan Marsalek, only 37, fond of Seville rose suits and sudden disappearances. One week he would be in Singapore, dazzling Asian venture funds with PowerPoint slides of colored arrows. The next he would surface in Cyprus or Dubai, whispering about encrypted wallets and unbanked millions. Colleagues spoke of him with a mix of envy and awe. "He knows everyone," they said, lowering their voices, "and everything." Across town, Benedict Schwartz, a financial reporter with slightly threadbare jackets and a talent for polite persistence, stared at a spreadsheet whose columns refused to add up. The figures had arrived by courier, slipped from a brown envelope along with a note, "Look at the cash." Benedict had been covering WirePay for years and admired its audacity, yet he had never managed to reconcile the company's booming profits with its slender cash flows. A global payment processor should gush liquidity, like a toll booth collecting coins. WirePay seemed to run on promise, not pennies. Benedict called up bank filing databases, cross-checked subsidiary names, and noticed that the bulk of WirePay's profits came from three little-known partners in the Philippines, Singapore, and Dubai. Each supposedly processed transactions on WirePay's behalf. Each also claimed to hold in escrow hundreds of millions of euros that belonged to WirePay's European balance sheet. Yet the audit trail ended in photocopied letters and blurred signatures. In the spring of 2019, a warm breeze carried the scent of linden blossoms through Munich's boulevards. Inside WirePay, auditors from Ernst & Young arrived for their annual review. Marcus Braun welcomed them with soft Viennese courtesy. Jan Marsalek arrived late, breathless from the airport, scattering mint tablets on the polished table. He produced, with flourish, 2 banking confirmations from BPI and OCBC, Asian lenders outlining vast trust accounts in WirePay's name. The auditors photographed the letters, noted the balances, and ticked the boxes. Yet a junior associate, Helena Fisher, frowned. The documents bore no digital verification codes, only rubber stamps. Helena asked whether she might speak directly with the banks. Marsalek flashed a quick smile, explaining that time zone differences made calls difficult. Still, he promised access soon. The meeting adjourned, pastries were served, and conversations drifted to football. Helena, however, could not shake the unease, especially after Marcus Braun, during a hallway chat, referred to the escrow money as a mere technicality. Months later, Benedict's editor agreed to publish a cautious probe. The headline ran in the Tuesday business section, "Mystery Cash Clouds FinTech Star." WirePay spokesperson dismissed it as rumor-mongering by short sellers. The stock dipped 3%, then climbed again as analysts issued buy notes. Confidence, once installed, had its own gravity. But the probe pried open a door. Regulators at BaFin, embarrassed by whispers that they favored the hometown hero, summoned WirePay's executives for clarification. Marcus delivered polished slides, growth curves, geographic maps, testimonials from pleased merchants. Jan Marsalek, tireless, spoke of revolutionary micropayment rails, quoting William Gibson. "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." The regulators nodded. The meeting ended in smiles. Only Helena Fisher refused to move on. She booked flights to Manila and Singapore, paying from her own pocket, unsure whether the firm would reimburse her. Once on the ground, she visited the listed offices of WirePay's partners. In Manila, she found a single locked room inside a half-empty strip mall. In Singapore, a mailbox service behind a yoga studio. When she tried to schedule a visit to the supposed trustee bank, the receptionist said, "We don't offer escrow accounts of that size." Helena felt the odd vertigo that precedes disaster, the moment when one realizes the floor is made of painted glass. Meanwhile, Jan Marsalek vanished again, this time claiming he had urgent meetings in Beirut. 3 days later he texted Marcus an encrypted note. "All set. We'll send files Monday." Monday passed. No files. Marcus grew pale, investor calls multiplied. Benedict received a second envelope, containing internal emails in which executives begged Jan for bank statements and he replied with emojis. In June 2020, WirePay delayed its audited results for the third time. The share price wobbled like a candle flame. Helena, back in Munich with photographs of empty offices, met the audit committee and outlined her findings. Silence draped the room as she finished. One director finally whispered, "So the cash doesn't exist?" Helena nodded. The next morning, Marcus Braun phoned BaFin and admitted that 1.9 billion in escrow funds were likely missing. The phrase circulated through newsrooms with chilling speed. At 9:15 a.m., trading in WirePay shares was halted. By noon, police entered headquarters, their footsteps echoing across the marble foyer that once hosted product launches and champagne toasts. Jan Marsalek could not be found. Airport logs showed he had flown to Minsk, then disappeared from radar. Rumors placed him in Moscow, Kuala Lumpur, Tripoli. Interpol issued a red notice. Tabloid headlines called him the man without a shadow. Marcus Braun, more subdued, surrendered to authorities, a folded trench coat draped over his arm. Reporters called out questions about contrition. He murmured that he had trusted the wrong people. Employees filed out carrying boxes, some crying, some angry, most numb. Decades of pension savings evaporated. Merchants scrambled to reroute payment gateways. Trust, that gossamer asset, shredded in real time. Helena walked past the empty reception desk, feeling neither triumph nor defeat, only the hollow fatigue that follows the discovery of an unwelcome truth. Outside, summer rain began to fall, streaking the WirePay logo with rivulets that looked almost like tears. Benedict met her under the awning, notebook in hand. "You did it?" he said softly. Helena shook her head. "No," she replied, gazing at the darkened windows above. "The numbers did it. We just finally believed them." They stood there together, listening to the rain and to the distant wail of sirens converging on the headquarters that had once promised to transform the future, but succeeded only in erasing the present. On a spring morning in 2012, the citizens of Dixon, Illinois, gathered along the Rock River to watch the dogwood trees bloom. The town, population 15,000, was proud of its frugal reputation. Every council meeting opened with reminders about patching potholes and stretching snow removal funds. And at the center of this careful balancing act stood Rita Crandall, the city comptroller, a woman whose quiet efficiency seemed as dependable as sunrise over the riverbank. Rita was 59, slight and unfailingly polite. She wore pastel cardigans and spoke in a voice softened by Midwestern courtesy. Residents joked that if you dropped a penny on the sidewalk, Rita would record it in the ledgers before it stopped rolling. She had managed Dixon's books for more than 2 decades, guiding mayors through recessions and floods, always emerging with balanced budgets and a faint, satisfied smile. When she asked for signatures, aldermen signed without reading. When she proposed an investment, they nodded on reflex. Trust in Dixon wore Rita's spectacles. Yet 30 miles outside town, past fields of soy and corn, stood Meritage Farms, a sprawling equestrian estate that looked lifted from Kentucky bluegrass country. White-railed paddocks stretched toward the horizon, and barns gleamed cherry red against the sky. Visitors whispered about the price tags. $150,000 broodmares, horse trailers the size of apartments, a mahogany-paneled viewing lounge scented with cedar and sweet feed. At the center of this immaculate world walked the very same Rita, only here she wore tailored riding jackets and spoke the brisk, jargon-laden dialect of competitive quarter-horse breeding. Some locals knew she loved horses. Few grasped the scale. "Rita has a hobby," they said, imagining a backyard stable. They did not picture auction rings in Texas where bidders waved numbered paddles at six-figure maras, nor did they hear Rita's phone hum with wire transfer alerts from banks as far away as Florida. She traveled often to shows, Ocala, Scottsdale, Fort Worth, returning with ribbons and an ever-growing menagerie. Whenever someone asked how she financed it, she laughed gently. "I invest," she said, offering no details. People assumed a modest inheritance or shrewd stock picks. In small towns, polite assumptions keep the peace. Lisa Madigan, a young clerk in the treasurer's office, first sensed disquiet while reconciling the city's motor fuel tax receipts. The state sent Dixon roughly $300,000 each quarter, yet their own ledgers reflected far less. Lisa flagged the mismatch, believing it a clerical delay. Weeks passed, the difference persisted, and Lisa mentioned it to Mayor Burke during a coffee break chat. The mayor, loyal to Rita, replied, "I'm sure she's got it handled." Lisa nodded but quietly kept notes. That winter, the mayor contracted a Chicago accounting firm, Clifton Larson, for an unrelated municipal bond project. One associate, Ryan Marks, requested routine bank statements from the city's primary account. Rita mailed them promptly. Yet Ryan noticed that one statement referenced an unfamiliar account ending in 029. Its header read simply RSED. Assuming a minor fund, he asked Rita for those statements too. She promised to send them after lunch but never did. Curiosity, like a loose thread, can unravel a tapestry. Ryan pulled. The bank confirmed that RSED was indeed a city account, opened in 1990, with sole signing authority granted to Rita Crandall. Its balance exceeded $5 million, astonishing for a town whose entire annual budget barely reached $10 million. Ryan called the mayor, voice low, suggesting an urgent meeting. Inside council chambers, the confrontation was almost gentle. Rita arrived in a powder blue blazer, carrying a leather binder. Ryan presented the numbers. Transfers siphoned from legitimate city accounts into RSCD, then wired to Rita's personal checking or to horse auction houses. Over 22 years, the total exceeded $53 million. The room fell silent long enough for the wall clock to tick 3 full minutes. Finally, Rita sighed, removed her glasses, and said, "I suppose you'll need my keys." The FBI arrived the next morning. Agents photographed file cabinets, downloaded spreadsheets, and followed a paper trail as smooth as freshly laid asphalt. Forged signatures, fictitious invoices, bank slips marked sewer capital, masking wires to equine supply firms. Rita had begun small. 25,000. Here. 30,000. There, testing the waters like a swimmer dipping a toe. When no alarm sounded, she grew bolder. The scheme became routine. Each time state funds arrived, she carved a slice for horses, then adjusted the books to conceal the wound. Dixon's infrastructure crumbled quietly, potholes deepened. A planned riverfront bike path never materialized. Taxpayers grumbled, never suspecting their money grazed in distant pastures. Reporters descended on the sleepy town, microphones poised. Neighbors stared at Rita's modest ranch-style house, bewildered that it sheltered a secret millionaire. In interviews, former mayors expressed hurt. "She ate at our tables," one said, voice trembling. The betrayal felt intimate, a violation not of finance alone but of community. At trial, federal prosecutors outlined the embezzlement with almost clinical calm. They displayed glossy photos of stallions, trailers, jeweled bridles. Jurors gasped at the sums. $725,000. For a single mare named Pizzazzy Lady, $2.1 million in transport fees over 4 years. Rita, in gray prison garb, listened without visible emotion. Her defense offered no elaborate theory, only that she loved horses and lost control. She entered a guilty plea, sparing the town a protracted spectacle. Judge Philip Reinhardt sentenced her to 19 years, calling the crime extraordinary in its duration and magnitude. Dixon received partial restitution through auctions of horses and property, yet the ledger would never fully balance. Roads remained scarred, civic projects sat unfinished, trust was harder to pave than asphalt. On the day Rita left for federal prison, April rain fell over Meritage Farms. Workers loaded prize maras into trailers bound for auction. The paddocks, once bustling, stood empty, their white rails reflecting in shallow puddles. Back in Dixon, Lisa Madigan walked to the riverfront after work. She leaned on the railing, listening to water slip past limestone banks, and wondered how long a town needs to unlearn misplaced faith. She felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve to reread every line, question every assumption, and remember that on the calmest surfaces, currents may still run deep. Lisa turned toward City Hall, lights glowing in the dusk, and took a slow breath. The budget season was coming, and the numbers at last were hers to guard. The autumn mist over Wolfsburg tasted faintly of diesel on the morning Martin Kruger received his promotion. From a modest cubicle engineer, he was now head of compliance testing at Volkskraft's powertrain division, an unglamorous title that carried surprising sway. He accepted the new badge with a hesitant smile, wondering why an awkward software specialist deserved such rapid ascent. The answer arrived later that day, in a windowless conference room that smelled of coffee and nervous ambition. 3 men were waiting: Dr. Ulrich Behrens from Engine Development, Tobias Lorenz from Regulatory Affairs, and seated at the far end, the ever-composed board member, Frau Ingrid Vogel. An open laptop projected a single slide: U.S. emission targets, Phase 3. Below the title glowed numbers that seemed almost fanciful. Martin knew the science. A diesel, even with cutting-edge aftertreatment, could not hit those limits without choking its own heart. Frau Vogel's voice was calm, almost maternal. "Our new American model launches next spring," she said. "Marketing has promised a clean diesel miracle. We cannot fail." Tobias slid a slim folder toward Martin. Inside lay code snippets, annotations in shorthand, and one directive underlined in red: Sonderfunction. Special function. Martin realized he was staring at instructions for a defeat device. Software that would detect laboratory testing cycles and briefly scrub the exhaust, then revert to high-performance, high-pollution mode on the open road. The room fell silent, as if each attendee were listening to the faint hiss of ethical pressure escaping through a vent. Finally, Dr. Behrens spoke. "We don't have another option. Hardware fixes would cost €1 billion in 2 years." Martin felt his chest tighten, but he heard himself murmur, "I'll look into it." The meeting adjourned. A promotion, he understood, could be a velvet shackle. Weeks slid by in a haze of code reviews and clandestine evenings. Martin recruited 2 young programmers, Stefan and Layla, telling them only that the project was confidential efficiency optimization. They worked in an isolated lab nicknamed the Aquarium because its glass walls allowed supervisors to peer inside without hearing a word. Martin installed sound masking speakers that played soft rainfall, a lullaby against stray questions. The algorithm was elegant: monitor steering wheel angle, barometric pressure, vehicle speed, and test cell temperature. If all matched the predictable pattern of an official emissions cycle, the engine eased back, injecting extra urea, lowering combustion, purring like a saint. On real roads, where drivers turned, braked, climbed hills, the software relaxed, restoring torque and sacrificing cleanliness. The programmers were proud of the precision. Martin felt none of their pride, only a dull throb behind his eyes. Launch day arrived in San Francisco beneath a cloudless sky. Television reporters admired the European sedans parked along the Embarcadero. "Green performance," one anchor gushed. Test drives impressed journalists. Torque came smooth as silk, and the tailpipes glowed with metaphorical halos. Sales climbed. Billboard slogans declared, "Pure power, pure air." Yet across the bay, at the small, grant-funded International Council for Clean Transportation, analyst Emma Wade studied discrepancies. Roadside pollution sensors registered spikes whenever fleets of the new Volkskrafts roamed nearby. In the lab, the same engines passed with honors. Emma, patient as migrating fog, collected data for months, then partnered with West Virginia University's portable testing team. They strapped emissions equipment onto 3 Volkskraft cars and drove from Los Angeles to Seattle, filling logbooks with concentrations so high they sometimes tripped alarms. Volkskraft remained serene, sponsoring jazz festivals and releasing ads of children drawing pictures on unsoiled sidewalks. Inside headquarters, Frau Vogel accepted awards for sustainability, her speeches rich with words like integrity and heritage. Martin watched these broadcasts alone in his apartment, volume muted, feeling as though his own lungs were the filters clogging with soot. In early September, Emma's group sent a courteous, technically dense letter to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA forwarded it to Volkskraft, requesting clarification. The memo landed on Tobias's desk. He called an emergency meeting. Martin, Dr. Barons, and corporate attorneys filled the same windowless room as before. This time, nobody served coffee. The lawyers suggested a quiet software recall, phrased as an enhancement. Tobias argued for delay, perhaps blaming rogue suppliers. Martin listened, palms sweating. He finally spoke. They have on-road data. It's irrefutable. Dr. Barons glared as if betrayal had seated itself at the table. Frau Vogel arrived late, reviewed the slides, and closed her eyes a moment, as if mourning a lost friend. Then she ordered full cooperation, but only once every strategic option had been assessed. Cooperation proved futile. In a fluorescent EPA office outside Washington, investigators unpacked millions of lines of code, their analysis converging on Sonder function. Public notice followed. News tickers around the world flashed, diesel deception. Markets panicked. Volkskraft shares fell like loosened bolts. Customers felt duped, regulators furious, rival automakers quietly delighted. When German prosecutors opened a criminal probe, Martin was summoned for questioning. He confessed in measured sentences, careful to shield Stefan and Layla, who were still unaware of the device's true purpose. As he exited the gray stone courthouse, reporters crowded him. Camera shutters fluttered. One journalist asked, "Did you think you'd get away with it?" Martin, exhausted, answered with the truth he had avoided, "We wanted success more than we wanted to be right." Frau Vogel resigned, citing health reasons. Dr. Barons retired to pursue personal projects. Tobias faced indictments for fraud. Volkskraft earmarked $25 billion for recalls and fines, a sum larger than the GDP of some nations. In dealerships, technicians flashed engine computers with new software that dulled performance and heightened fuel use. Customers grumbled. Lawsuits multiplied like sparks in dry grass. Months later, on a chilly evening, Martin stood on a pedestrian bridge over the Middle-End Canal. Cargo barges glided below, engines throbbing, their diesel fumes curling into the night. He imagined molecules of nitrogen oxide rising unseen, carrying a whisper of his guilt into the dark. When friends asked what lesson he had learned, he struggled for words. Ambition, he thought, is not evil, it is simply fire. But in sealed rooms with walls built of targets and promises, even a small flame can suffocate the air. He watched his breath mingle with the autumn haze, then turned toward the city's distant lights, aware that trust, once burned, leaves a scent that lingers longer than smoke, clinging to clothes, to memory, and most of all to silence. Elliot Grant arrived at Larchmont Securities 2 minutes before dawn, as the Thames still reflected the city's sodium glow. Newly hired as a junior analyst, he felt equal parts awe and dread while ascending the empty escalators of Canary Wharf. Larchmont's trading floor, 3 stories of glass, screens, and murmured forecasts, was whispered about in business schools as the place where fortunes appeared out of thin air. What no brochure mentioned was that the firm's real engine worked after sunset, in hushed phone calls and coded texts that never grazed a Bloomberg terminal. At the center of that undercurrent stood Victoria Havers, head of European mergers. She was in her mid-40s, with the posture of a dressage rider and a smile that rarely reached her eyes. Colleagues called her the Oracle, half in reverence, half in fear, because Victoria anticipated corporate takeovers with uncanny precision. When she recommended a client buy shares of a sleepy Dutch chemical maker, the company received a $6 billion acquisition offer a week later. When she hinted that a Spanish telecom giant looked overvalued, its shares plunged on rumors of accounting trouble none had yet reported. Elliot, assigned to Victoria's team, watched her work with almost childlike wonder. Late evenings, he delivered printouts to her corner office, where she sat alone, humming faintly, eyes fixed on nothing visible. One night he risked a question: "How do you forecast events nobody else sees?" She lifted her gaze, amused. "There's always a whisper before the storm," she replied, "if you know which corridors carry sound." Elliot soon noticed irregularities. Victoria's instructions were oddly timed, by just before a regulatory filing, sell minutes before negative news. She used disposable prepaid phones, discarding one every fortnight. She never left a digital trail, instead giving orders aloud or on handwritten notes that she asked assistants to shred. At times, she invited Elliot to local wine bars where she spoke in parables. "People think markets are math," she'd say, twirling a Merlot. "But markets are gossip that learn to count." Into this atmosphere stepped Miles Calder, a mid-level investigator from the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, grey-haired, mild-mannered, almost forgettable. He arranged a polite sit-down at Larchmont to discuss general compliance. Victoria greeted him warmly, offering espresso, answering questions with flawless poise. Miles departed with courteous handshakes, yet Elliot glimpsed the faintest flicker in Victoria's eyes as the elevator doors closed, an acknowledgement that the cat and mouse had sniffed each other. Weeks later, Larchmont's proprietary desk made a fortune shorting a French logistics firm hours before it announced lost government contracts. The FCA opened a formal inquiry. Victoria assured her staff it was routine. Elliot wanted to believe her. Debt from student loans pressed him like a hand on his back. Still, he began saving exported chat logs and order confirmations to a personal folder, labeling it innocuously as lunch spots. One December afternoon, a courier delivered a small parcel to Victoria. Inside lay a silver USB stick and a note. "Tomorrow, 9:17, board decision." Victoria studied the message, then summoned Elliot. "I want a sensitivity model on Bjorn Pharma," she said, tone light. "Use aggressive revenue growth." Elliot knew Bjorn was rumored to be an acquisition target. He felt a pulse in his ears. That night he could not sleep. Canary Wharf's towers blinked red against low clouds, matching the crimson digits of his bedside clock. At 2 a.m. he rose, opened his laptop, and reviewed insider trading statutes. The language was precise, unemotional. His heartbeat was not. He remembered his father installing windows on construction sites in the Midlands, coming home exhausted yet honest. Elliot closed the laptop and stared into darkness until dawn. The trading floor buzzed at 9 o'clock. Victoria stood behind Elliot's chair, voice gentle. "Place the order at 9:15 sharp." He entered the ticker, hovering over the keyboard. 9:14, 9:15, 9:16. His finger trembled. At 9:17 the share price leapt. Someone else had pulled the trigger. Victoria's calm expression flickered, just once, before she walked away without comment. That evening, Miles Calder reappeared, unannounced, flanked by two colleagues. Compliance officers escorted them to an interview room. Whispers rippled across desks. Victoria was led in first. Elliot waited on a bench, palms sweating. Through frosted glass he saw silhouettes. Miles leaning forward, Victoria's poised shoulders. An hour passed. When she emerged, her jacket was immaculate, but her eyes looked hollow, like rooms after furniture is removed. She nodded at Elliot, almost kindly, then left with the investigators. The firm suspended trading in Bjorn Pharma positions. The FCA froze related accounts. Rumors spread that Victoria's source was an IT contractor at a London law firm, smuggling merger documents for cash and a promise of escape from debt. The silver USB was his dead-drop signature. Under questioning, Victoria allegedly claimed she'd acted out of professional imperative, the need to deliver results in a culture that worshipped prescience. Days later, Elliot found an envelope on his keyboard. Inside, a handwritten note for the corridors and a modest pair of noise-canceling earbuds. No signature, but the handwriting was Victoria's. He realized it was half a joke, half a benediction. Shield your ears from whispers or be claimed by them. Victoria pleaded guilty to a single count of insider trading. She received a 4-year sentence, light by headline standards but heavy for a woman who once dictated markets with a phone call. The IT contractor received 18 months and deportation. Larchmont paid £140 million in fines and settled a civil suit with aggrieved shareholders. Analysts on television shook their heads, feigning surprise, while secretly recalculating models to account for the cost of integrity. On a chilly March morning, Elliot walked along the riverbank, Canary Wharf's towers mirrored in still water. He no longer worked at Larchmont. He had taken a compliance role at a pension fund, far from the hum of trading floors. Occasionally, he reached into his coat pocket and touched the earbuds. He had never used them. Instead, he kept them as a talisman, a reminder that silence is not absence. It is the space where choices echo longest. He paused beside the water, listening. The city hummed. Buses, footsteps, distant sirens. Somewhere, corridors still carried whispers. Elliot exhaled, turned away from the glass skyline, and followed a quieter path toward the morning light, where rumors held less power and numbers, perhaps, could breathe the rare air of truth. London's glass canyons gleamed silver in the fragile dawn when Colin Mercer tapped his badge against the lobby reader of Iberian Continental Bank's trading tower. At 32, he ran the short-term interest rate desk, a vantage point from which he could watch money in its purest, vaporous form. Numbers sliding across screens, shaping futures no factory could match. Colleagues nicknamed him Clockwork, because his trades landed with metronomic profit, week after week, regardless of storms in the wider market. They assumed genius. Colin preferred they never asked what wound the gears. The heartbeat of his strategy was Libor, the benchmark that told the planet how much a dollar or euro should cost by breakfast tomorrow. Each morning at 11 o'clock, 20-odd banks whispered their borrowing estimates to a small bureau. The bureau lopped off the highs and lows, averaged the rest, and published a single sacred rate. Billions in derivatives pivoted on that tiny figure, derivatives Colin controlled. His method wasn't complicated. Persuade enough submitters to nudge their numbers by a hair, pocket the drift. A fraction of a basis point could fatten his book by £300,000. He did not bribe or threaten. He relied on camaraderie, that old city code of favors returned over pints in Leadenhall pubs. A message might read, "Little high on 3-month today, mate. Fancy a shave?" The contact would reply with a winking emoji, and the deed was done. To Colin it felt victimless, almost playful, like tilting a pinball machine. Across the river, in a rented Southwark flat, risk analyst Priya Deshmukh sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on a stack of economics journals. She had been hired by the Financial Conduct Authority to comb historical Libor data for patterns that plain sight missed. What she found troubled her. On days Iberian Continental reported an outlier submission, corresponding futures volumes at the exchange spiked in the bank's favor. The correlation was modest but persistent, a tap dripping in the night. Priya asked her supervisor whether traders could influence submissions. He shrugged. They're firewalled from the treasury desks. She knew walls built of policy often crumbled against whispers built of ambition. She kept digging, scripting queries that painted time-lapse heat maps of rate movements. A single ID tag appeared frequently in chat logs the FCA had subpoenaed from other banks. See Mercer. Meanwhile, Colin's appetite grew. He began orchestrating multi-day maneuvers, easing the Monday rate, tightening Wednesday, capturing the whiplash. His chats turned bolder, sprinkled with jokes about rigging Big Ben and printing T-money. One afternoon he suggested, half serious, that submitters synchronize adjustments to spell his initials in the decimal places. They laughed. No one threatened to report. The fraternity of markets prized winners and forgave swagger. Summer 2011 arrived with rare heat, and rumors of reform floated like warm air through Canary Wharf. Newspapers speculated the benchmark might be overhauled. Politicians muttered about opacity. Colin watched the headlines with detached amusement. Reform, he believed, moved slower than profit. Then, on an otherwise forgettable Tuesday, compliance officers swept the trading floor, collecting phones and escorting several staff into side rooms. A Reuters article had broken. Regulators probe rate rigging at major banks. Colin's pulse quickened but steadied again when no one called his name. By evening he felt almost giddy, certain the net was too large to notice one fish. Priya, meanwhile, delivered her findings to senior FCA lawyers. Her presentation was quiet, the room dimmed for slides. Scatter plots blooming red where Iberian Continental's trades aligned with skewed submissions. Afterward, a veteran attorney rubbed his chin. "How certain are you?" She met his eyes. "Certain enough to knock on a door tomorrow." That door belonged to Colin. Dawn cast long stripes across his minimal West End apartment when the buzz of the intercom shattered his dreams. 2 officers from the Serious Fraud Office presented a warrant. Colin's smile, usually quick, faltered as they sifted through drawers, seizing USB sticks and a leather notebook filled with hand-drawn payoff diagrams. One agent read aloud a chat. "Need 3M lib low 2 ticks please. Promise champagne." The words, once harmless banter, now sounded like nails against glass. At headquarters, interviews unfolded in soft tones that belied their gravity. Colin admitted suggesting rates but denied coercion. "Everyone did it," he insisted, a phrase that tasted flimsier each time it left his mouth. Prosecutors, armed with Priya's correlation matrices, pressed harder. They displayed emails from smaller banks thanking him for profitable tips, evidence of quid pro quo that shaded friendly nudges into conspiracy. News desks lit up with the phrase "Libor scandal," and the public learned with indignation how their mortgages and student loans linked to a rate steered by private banter. Iberian Continental suspended Colin, then dismissed him when documents showed his desk earned £44 million in 2 years. Money now labeled tainted. Shareholders filed suits. Lawmakers convened hearings. Trust, that invisible lubricant, leaked into headlines. Colin pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, trading liberty for candor. In court he looked smaller than the tailored suits he once favored, shoulders rounded, gaze fixed on the polished wood of the dock. The judge called the crime a subtle corrosion of faith in the financial system, sentencing him to 11 years. Gasps swept the gallery, some bankers blanched, imagining themselves in his chair. Priya watched coverage on her flat's flickering television. She felt no triumph, only the hush that follows a storm, the uneasy knowledge that a benchmark rebuilt today could be bent again tomorrow by hands not yet scrutinized. She turned off the set and opened a window. Evening air drifted in, carrying the faint clang of St. Paul's bells. Time, she thought, keeps perfect rhythm even when markets do not. Months later, Libor's governance was overhauled. Submissions anchored to real transactions, audits tightened, transparency pledged. Yet in conference bars, traders still joked about the old days, when rates moved like marionettes. Colin's name surfaced less often, already half mythical, a cautionary tale told with a shrug. Each weekday at 11 o'clock, a new benchmark now flashes across terminals. Priya, promoted to lead analyst, glances at the figure, then at a line of code she wrote to flag anomalies. Somewhere, gears still turn, but the room is quieter, the tick of the clock more honest, for now. Callisto Tanzi liked to say that milk was the most honest liquid on earth, white as a clean ledger. From a cramped Parma storefront he built Parmalat into a global empire. Cartons stamped with sun-yellow daisies filled supermarket coolers from Lisbon to Buenos Aires. By the late 1990s the company's blue logo felt as Italian as opera or olive oil. Children learned to write their names on its giveaway calendars. Pensioners bought its bonds, convinced they were investing in breakfast itself. All the while Tanzi moved through airports trailed by admirers who whispered that he had married provincial virtue to modern finance. Yet honesty, like milk, spoils when left too long in warm rooms. Elisa Moretti, a junior treasurer stationed in Parmalat's glass headquarters outside Milan, first caught the sour note on a rainy Tuesday. Her task was routine: reconcile short-term cash with projected payments, but one column glared red. A Cayman subsidiary, Bonlat, supposedly held €3.9 billion in liquid assets. Bank of America had even issued a confirmation letter. The problem, Elisa realized, was simple. Every wire she tracked bled outward from Parma to vendors, salaries, taxes. Nothing ever flowed back from Bonlat. For a treasury flush with billions, the main accounts looked oddly parched. She approached her supervisor, a genial man who shrugged. "Intercompany timing," he said. "The money comes home at quarter end." Elisa nodded, yet saved screenshots to a personal folder. She had been raised on a dairy farm. Faint smells changed her world. This one lingered. Above them Tanzi presided with folksy calm, quoting Dante during board meetings and gifting journalists boxes of chocolate milk. He preferred loyalty to brilliance. Anyone asking hard questions found themselves transferred to distant subsidiaries or eased toward early retirement. An outsider might have noticed that the chief financial officer rotated every 2 years, leaving behind few notes and many sealed envelopes. The illusion began to wobble in 2001, when auditors at Grant Thornton requested original statements for the Bonlat account. Tansey produced a crisp fax from the Cayman branch of Bank of America, complete with signatures and a seal. The auditors rubber-stamped it, perhaps dazzled by Parmalat's €7 billion revenue line. Had they bothered to phone the branch, a receptionist would have explained that no such account existed. No call was made. Far away in Genoa, financial journalist Marco Sartori prepared a Sunday column on Italian corporate debt. He noticed that Parmalat's leverage ratios were benign only because the famous Bonlat cash acted as ballast. A hunch tugged at him. Using contacts, Marco obtained bond prospectus footnotes referencing a mysterious credit-linked certificate issued by a small bank in Singapore. The instrument claimed to insure Parmalat against default on itself. Marco's editor killed the story, worrying about libel. Still, Marco kept digging, leaving voicemails with traders who had begun shorting the company's stock. Meanwhile, Tansey's empire expanded into football clubs, travel agencies, even mineral water. Each venture lacked synergy but provided fresh places to park debt. When banks balked, Tansey's finance team issued mini-bonds marketed to Italian grandmothers promised 9% sicuro. The interest was paid from new bonds, cream poured to hide foam. By late 2003, global credit tightened. Banks demanded proof of Parmalat's liquidity. Deloitte, the new auditor, insisted on a direct confirmation from Bank of America. This time the fax machine stayed silent. Tansey's lieutenant, Fausto Tana, attempted a last resort. He instructed an employee to forge a PDF on Parmalat letterhead, attaching a doctored logo and a made-up phone number that rang to an empty office staffed by no one. The forgery was clumsy, a puddle disguised as a lake. Deloitte flagged the anomaly to Consub, Italy's market watchdog. Within 48 hours, trading in Parmalat shares was halted. Television crews camped outside headquarters, their floodlights revealing streaks of tension on employees' faces. Tansey called an emergency board meeting in a walnut-paneled conference room redolent of burnt espresso. He proposed selling the company's Brazilian dairy arm to raise cash. One director finally dared to ask, "Cash for what exactly?" Silence answered. Investigators descended. They discovered that Bonlat's €3.9 billion never existed. The confirmation letter was fictional. Parmalat, once hailed for liquidity, was in fact missing €14 billion, Europe's largest bankruptcy to date. Funds had traveled through a labyrinth of offshore entities, returning only as photocopies. Bondholders faced ruin. Farmers who supplied milk awaited payment that would never come. Elisa watched agents box up ledgers she had balanced for years. She felt no vindication, only a chill like walking through an empty barn at dusk. Tansey was arrested while hiding at his daughter's apartment, wearing a modest sweater that failed to soften the image of a patriarch undone. Cameras captured his weary quote, "I was the company was me." It sounded more confession than defense. At trial, prosecutors displayed a flowchart resembling spilled spaghetti. Shell companies feeding one another invoices for powdered milk that never shipped, advertising campaigns that never aired, profits that existed solely in press releases. Tana testified that Tansey ordered the fabrications to protect the dream. Tansey murmured about market pressure and patriotic duty. The judge, unimpressed, handed him an 8-year sentence, later extended after appeals. Parmalat's bankruptcy estate clawed back assets. Tuscan villas, paintings, a yacht named Blue Dream. Much evaporated. Small investors picketed in Turin holding empty milk cartons stamped with the word traditai, betrayed. The Italian government orchestrated a slimmed-down successor company, but the sun-yellow daisies no longer felt innocent. Years later, in a modest office in Bologna, Elisa audited logistics software for a startup that delivered groceries by bicycle. Sometimes she paused by the chilled section of supermarkets, staring at rows of cartons under new corporate stewardship. She still drank milk but always checked the expiration date twice. Memory, she learned, curdles slower than dairy. On clear mornings, commuters driving past Parmalat's former HQ glimpsed the faded outline of the logo, sun-bleached but legible, a ghost brand haunting concrete. It whispers a caution older than finance. When something appears as pure as fresh milk, hold it to the light. Spoilage hides best in whiteness. Adrian Lowe spent his nights in the silent glare of a Mountain View clean room, coaxing photons through silicon. At 36 he led the LiDAR program at Waypath, the autonomous vehicle unit of an alphabet-sized conglomerate. The team called him the cartographer. His algorithms painted invisible cities of light around every prototype car. Investors valued those spinning sensors at billions, and Adrian, though awkward in conversation, felt the heady thrum of destiny each time the lasers chimed alive. Yet destiny turned fickle in February 2016. A reorganization diminished Adrian's domain. Half his headcount was reassigned to safety redundancy. He watched junior MBAs redraw roadmaps he had etched in code, and something inside him cooled from fire to ice. One drizzly evening he connected a terabyte drive to the secure server, bypassed a flag with a line of command line Latin, and copied 14,000 files. Schematics, board layouts, manufacturing tolerances, enough he believed to rebuild the crown jewel elsewhere. The transfer bar filled in silence, green pixels reflecting in his rimless glasses. When it finished, he wiped the audit logs and drove home along US 101, the rain stitching faint Morse against the windshield. Weeks later Adrian resigned, to pursue new challenges. Silicon Valley gossip blinked like fairy lights. He had funding from Sequoia and Kleiner, he was building stealth rockets, he was retiring to Mendocino to farm truffles. The truth materialized 3 months later when he unveiled Helios Robotics, promising level 5 autonomy within a year. A timeline that made engineers laugh and venture capitalists salivate. Helios's website showcased a cylindrical LiDAR unit strikingly similar to Waypath's latest prototype, minus the corporate pastel. Across the bay, Ride Nation, the ride-sharing colossus famous for surge pricing and steel-nerved aggression, felt its self-driving program lagging. Its CEO, Dana Pike, wanted victory, not parity. She met Adrian in a decommissioned airport hangar converted into a private test track. He demoed a Helios vehicle weaving between cardboard pedestrians with balletic grace. Dana's eyes narrowed. She offered $680 million in stock and cash on the spot. Adrian paused only long enough to check the vesting schedule. Ride Nation's engineers welcomed Helios with cautious applause that hid unease. Among them was Jessica Marlowe, a tall, soft-spoken systems integrity lead who believed software was a covenant, not a commodity. She reviewed Helios design packages and noticed folder structures identical to Waypath's internal taxonomy, obscure naming conventions like Plover_thermal_V7. One schematic still bore a faint footer, property of Waypath Confidential. Jessica reported the anomaly. Upper management thanked her and told her to focus forward. Tech, they said, evolved through rapid iteration, not litigation. But the footprint was too perfect, like a snow angel left by someone who never returned. Jessica dug quietly. In log archives she found a directory labeled Churchill, Waypath's code name for a novel 4-channel photodiode array announced only after Helios's founding. The dates didn't add up. She saved screenshots to an encrypted thumb drive, unsure whether she was safeguarding the company or its future prosecutor. Ride Nation's first integrated Helios test rolled onto San Jose streets that autumn. Tech bloggers crowded sidewalks, live streams ticking upward. The SUV shimmered with promise until, at a left turn, it drifted across the center line, forcing a cyclist to swerve. The vehicle righted itself, but the incident clip revealed a sensor dropout traced to firmware Adrian had altered that morning. Dana Pike summoned him. He blamed legacy interference and requested deeper access to Ride Nation's servers. The CEO granted it, desperate for headlines of success. Meanwhile, Waypath filed a civil action in federal court. Trade secret misappropriation, patent infringement, unjust enrichment. Their lawyers attached forensic evidence. Download timestamps matching Adrian's last week, security badge swipes synced to anomalous data transfers. The suit sought billions and an injunction. Tech reporters, smelling a courtroom epic, refreshed Pacer as though it dispensed oxygen. Ride Nation's legal chief convened an urgent review. Jessica, summoned as a fact witness, presented her thumb drive. Silence thickened. One attorney whispered, "This is radioactive." Dana Pike, jaw tight, asked Adrian directly, "Did you take their files?" Adrian met her gaze, a pale flicker behind pupils gone stormy, and said, "I built those files." The room registered the semantic dodge. The law, however, rarely honors philosophy over packet headers. Negotiations with Waypath collapsed when an internal memo leaked describing Ride Nation's strategy as sidestep then steamroll. The judge fast-tracked discovery. Federal marshals appeared at Adrian's Palo Alto townhouse at dawn, seizing laptops, external drives, even an antique slide rule on his bookshelf. Reporters captured him in athletic shorts, expression fixed between anger and incredulity, as though physics had betrayed him. Dana issued placid press releases about reevaluation, but board members murmured about fiduciary breach. Investors shaved billions off the valuation, and Dana's once meteoric career entered a holding pattern above corporate purgatory. Adrian faced criminal charges for theft of trade secrets. At arraignment he stood rigid, hands clasped, while the prosecutor described a premeditated looting of intellectual property. Jessica, watching from the gallery, felt a hollow relief tempered by dread. Ecosystems change when giants stumble. Outside, protesters chanted about worker rights, while venture capital tweets lamented innovation chilling. The trial never reached verdict. In a late-night deal, Adrian pled guilty to one count, avoiding a lengthy sentence in exchange for $95 million restitution and a 28-month term at a low-security facility in Lompoc. Waypath secured a perpetual license to any Helios patents. Ride Nation paid $245 million and issued a public apology couched in conditional verbs. On Adrian's first day in prison, the warden escorted him past a chain-link fence buzzing with desert wind. He blinked at the unfiltered blue sky, no LiDAR map overlaying the horizon, only bare existence. A reporter later asked what he regretted most. Through plexiglass, Adrian answered softly, "I thought code was neutral. Turns out ghosts live inside." The quote headlined tech blogs for a day, then slid beneath new controversies. Some evenings she drives the Bayshore Freeway and imagines invisible beams tracing the contours of traffic. Each pulse a reminder that every line of code carries fingerprints, and every shortcut casts a shadow. In Mountain View, the original Waypath sensor still spins atop updated cars, its hum modest but persistent, like a truth refused erasure. Passers-by rarely look up, yet light sweeps them anyway, recording position, velocity, intent. Ghost code, if it lingers, does so in silence, waiting for anyone to notice the faint imprint it leaves on the roads we trust. Bernard Madoff's office at 885 3rd Avenue felt less like Wall Street and more like a private club hidden high above it. Persian rugs muted every footstep, cream-colored couches swallowed visitors in discreet comfort, and a single abstract painting, crimson triangles rising toward a vanishing point, hung behind the reception desk. Clients called it the pyramid, though no one pondered the symbolism for long. They were there to see Bernie, the kindly elder statesman who spoke in a grandfather's hush and delivered returns as steady as the Hudson's tide. For decades the pattern never broke. 10, 11, sometimes 12%, good years and bad, recessions and booms, the line on quarterly statements climbed at an unwavering angle. Teachers' pension trustees in Ohio, a Paris private banking family, a Hollywood director. All received identical reassurance. "Nothing fancy," Bernie would say, patting a shoulder, "just disciplined hedging." He dismissed questions with a genial wave, "Why complicate a gift horse?" and invited them to view the Velvet Room, the gilt elevator ride downstairs where computers supposedly ran a secret algorithm. Few accepted. Fewer still noticed that the trading floor was silent, screens resting on blank blue desktops like sleeping eyes. Up on the 19th floor, Frank DiPascali managed the books, a Queen's accent softening into deference whenever Bernie entered. Frank's spreadsheets reported trades in big-cap American stocks placed at impossible prices, always a hair above the market's daily low or below its high. A junior accountant once joked they should buy lottery tickets with odds like that. Frank smiled, then deleted the column and reminded her Bernie's strategy involved split-strike conversions, too technical to dissect. The accountant told herself genius often hides behind jargon, and returned to reconciling deposits that arrived in cheerful torrents. One person, however, found the cheer too uniform. Dina Gold, a financial analyst at a Boston fund of funds, read Madoff's statements with a mathematician's skepticism. She plotted Bernie's monthly returns against the S&P 500 and saw a near-perfect horizontal bar. No volatility, no drawdowns, just smooth ascent. Markets aren't rivers, she told her supervisor. They're oceans, waves, storms. Her concerns were logged, then buried beneath the weight of boardroom gratitude. Every institution wants a linchpin that never slips. Winter 2008 brought crisp air and unrelenting headlines. Housing defaults, credit default swaps, names like Lehman and Bear tumbling from pedestals. Through the chaos, Bernie sent his usual letters, reassuring paragraphs, gentle fonts. Clients felt lucky. They told friends who in turn wired fresh millions. Money had become frightened, and frightened money seeks certainty. One Friday in early December, Bernie's sons, Mark and Andrew, climbed the mahogany stairs to their father's penthouse apartment on East 64th Street. They'd heard rumors, counterparties refusing trades, clearing firms demanding collateral. In the living room, Ruth Madoff poured tea while holiday lights blinked along Fifth Avenue. Bernie, wearing gray cashmere, asked the sons to sit. His voice cracked as he began, "It's all one big lie." They stared, uncomprehending. Bernie explained that no trades had been executed for years. Deposits from new investors paid redemptions to old ones. "About 50 billion, he whispered. Silence stretched until the mantel clock chimed 6. Mark finally asked, "What's the plan?" Bernie looked up with tired eyes. "I was thinking of mailing bonuses, then turning myself in." The sons left in shock, dialed a lawyer, and were advised to report immediately. By morning, the FBI rang the apartment buzzer. Agent Theodore Cassiapi found Bernie seated in a leather chair, hands folded. "Are there any innocent explanations?" the agent asked. Bernie shook his head. "No, it's just me." He rose, wrists extended for cuffs, then reconsidered and removed his wedding band, placing it on a side table as if checking valuables before surgery. Down on the sidewalk, cameras flashed. By evening, the crimson triangles of the office painting filled television screens worldwide. As subpoenas landed, the structure revealed itself. A simple ledger, assets always greater than liabilities on paper, while actual cash pooled in a Chase bank account whose balance dwindled whenever redemptions surged. There were no offshore labyrinths, no exotic options. Dina Gold watched events unfold on CNBC, feeling a twist of vindication knotted with dread. Her firm had invested $23 million. Auditors now labeled the position worthless. Across Europe, charities canceled scholarships, and an elderly couple in Avignon sold their vineyard to cover tax bills on phantom gains. Grief surfaced in unlikely forms. A Palm Beach retiree stood mute before an empty safe deposit box. In March 2009, Bernie entered the federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan wearing a bulletproof vest under his blazer, an irony that did not escape observers who trusted him to guard their futures. He pleaded guilty to 11 counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. When Judge Denny Chin asked why he surrendered, Bernie said, "I realized my arrest would inevitably happen." The word inevitably hung like mist. Minutes later, Chin imposed 150 years. Spectators exhaled in collective astonishment, not because of the length but because the system, so often lenient with boardroom crime, had finally measured punishment in centuries. Frank D. Pascali cooperated, pouring detail into hundreds of pages, backdated trades, off-the-shelf software that generated statements, a Xerox machine that hummed past midnight. He died of cancer before sentencing, his deposition sealed with a final apology to everyone who believed. Today, the Crimson Triangle painting sits in an evidence warehouse in Queens, wrapped in climate-controlled plastic. Tour guides at the federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, sometimes mention a former inmate who once managed billions and now mops hallways for 14 cents an hour. Visitors peer down corridors, hoping for a glimpse, but Bernie has retreated into the privacy that eluded him in freedom. On stormy nights, Dina Gold revisits her old spreadsheets, scrolling through columns of impossible steadiness. She teaches graduate seminars now, urging students to cherish volatility, the heartbeat of truthful data, she calls it. At times she remembers Bernie's receptionist guiding her past the crimson painting, its pyramid pointing upward into nothingness, and feels a chill. Perhaps the lesson is simple. When returns look like velvet, run your fingers against the grain. Fabric that's smooth may hide threads designed to unravel all at once. A single copy of Madoff's quarterly statement lies laminated on Dina's desk, not as a trophy but as a map of temptation. In the margin she has penciled a line from Virgil: Facilis descensus Averno, the descent to ruin is easy. She shows it to students at semester's end, then closes the folder, the whisper of its cover sounding like the soft sigh of curtains falling on an illusion finally gone dark. Morning fog still veiled the Seine when Jerome Kerviel swiped his badge through the glass turnstiles of Société Générale's steel and smoke La Défense Tower. At 30, he wore the modest suit of a provincial striver, but colleagues on the Delta One desk called him the magician. Somehow his tiny book of equity futures produced profits rivaling those of traders with 5 times his capital. Managers praised his market feel, and Jerome accepted accolades with a shy half-smile that disguised the frantic arithmetic ticking behind his eyes. The Delta One unit was built for low-risk hedging, plain vanilla index futures, arbitrage so dull it barely rustled spreadsheets. Yet dullness breeds permission. Risk controllers glanced at the desk's position reports, saw moderate numbers, and moved on to sexier threats like credit derivatives. They never noticed Jerome's private universe hidden one menu deep inside the trading system, a secret blotter labeled Suspended JK. In that twilight ledger his wagers ballooned. Long 3 billion euros of euro stocks here, short DAX there, bets balanced like spinning plates. Each evening he entered fictitious offsetting trades, contraparties invented from whole cloth, so official limits showed gentle ripples instead of tidal waves. In a nearby office, risk analyst Isabelle Mellet tracked daily limits with methodical calm. She noticed Jerome's VR, a measure of potential loss, remained eerily flat even on days when volatility rattled every other desk. She emailed compliance, JK returns deviate from peers, request deeper review. The reply arrived minutes later, acknowledged, position within thresholds. Isabel archived the thread, but the anomaly nagged her like a loose stitch in a winter coat. December 2007 brought roaring markets and roaring office parties. Jerome celebrated record gains. His manager, Jean-Luc Heilbronn, raised champagne and spoke of promotions. Jerome nodded, eyes on the floor. He alone knew the scale. Net exposure approaching 50 billion euros, more than the bank's market cap, leveraged through rolling futures that expired weekly, forcing a perpetual juggle. One slip and the masks would fall. The slip came with the new year. Global stocks trembled on subprime tremors. Futures gaps widened like cracked ice. Jerome logged in at dawn on January 18, 2008 and saw red figures bleeding across monitors. To stem losses he forged yet another counter trade, but the volume was so vast the back-office catalog balked. An automated reconciliation flagged a transaction against the ID of an obscure brokerage that had ceased to exist months earlier. The query landed on Isabel's desk. She walked the corridor to Jean-Luc's office, printout in hand. He skimmed it, brow furrowing. Probably a booking error, he muttered, but dialed Jerome anyway. The trader arrived moments later, cheeks flushed. Jean-Luc asked about the phantom broker. Jerome's mouth opened, searching for a plausible glitch. Words failed. Silence spread, hot and brittle. Jean-Luc ordered a full position report. Jerome returned to his desk, heart hammering, and began unwinding trades at market speed, selling billions into a falling market, waves that pushed prices lower still. By Monday morning, Société Générale faced a 6.3 billion euro loss, the largest rogue trading hit in history. Crisis meetings unfurled behind closed doors. Executives debated whether to blame markets or disclose the deeper wound. When regulators arrived, Jerome sat in a windowless conference room, fingers interlaced, recounting how a desire to prove myself had morphed into clandestine bets. He spoke without anger, almost with relief, as if captivity finally slowed the spinning plates. The bank rushed a press conference. CEO Daniel Boughton, pale beneath TV lights, called it an exceptional fraud committed by a single employee. Analysts scoffed. How could one mid-level trader move markets without alarms? Shares plunged 39% in 2 days. Commentators compared the loss to a small war chest. Depositors lined up at branches in quiet panic. Trust, thinner than rice paper, tore in public view. French prosecutors charged Jerome with breach of trust, forgery, and unauthorized computer use. At trial, the defense argued the bank benefited from Jerome's gains for years and turned a blind eye to methods. Prosecutors countered that he gambled with other people's futures, forging documents 2,400 times. Jerome, slender in an ill-fitting suit, admitted forging trades but insisted his intent was never theft, only to outdo himself day after day until the numbers ruled their creator. The court sentenced him to 5 years, 2 suspended, and 4.9 billion euros in restitution, an amount no salary could touch, more symbol than sentence. Société Générale strengthened controls, installing risk dashboards that blink crimson at the faintest divergence. Yet whispers in dealing rooms persisted. Could management really not know? Regulations tightened across Europe, but the memory of invisible digits piling into catastrophe proved harder to code. Isabel returned to her routines, now armed with broader audit access, yet the victory felt hollow. She had tugged a thread and watched a tapestry collapse on pensioners, students, entire towns whose savings linked to the bank's stock. On certain mornings she paused by the Seine, mist curling like unanswered questions, and wondered whether vigilance alone could cage ambition sharpened by boredom. Jerome served his term at Fleury-Mérogis, teaching fellow inmates accounting basics. Reporters pressed him for remorse. He often replied with a half shrug, "I played a game everyone around me applauded, until the dice rolled against us." After release he worked briefly as a tech consultant, then faded from headlines. The 4.9 billion euro still hangs over him, accruing symbolic interest, a reminder that some debts are calibrated not in currency but in cautionary weight. La Défense towers continue to glitter at dusk, their glass hides freshly polished compliance manuals. Yet inside, traders still chase slivers of basis points, screens still blink with futures ticks. Somewhere on a middle desk an ambitious junior studies market microstructure and feels the first spark of mastery. Outside, the Seine flows indifferent, carrying reflections of skyscrapers that promise solidity yet mirror water's own lesson. Even calm surfaces conceal currents swift enough to pull the unwatchful under. Bernard Ebbers liked to greet visitors with a firm handshake and a folksy drawl that made Wall Street analysts forget they were standing in a converted tractor repair warehouse in Clinton, Mississippi. There, framed by corrugated metal and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights, he built WorldCom, a patchwork of long-distance carriers stitched together into the second-largest telecom in America. "We're just stringing wire and telling stories," he'd chuckle, as if $40 billion in annual revenue were a side hustle. Investors adored the myth of the humble titan. So did television anchors, who filmed him in cowboy boots pacing the trading floor like a country preacher among spreadsheets. On the 18th floor of headquarters, Cynthia Cooper, internal audit vice president, kept quieter company. Log files, purchase orders, and the faint click of keys after midnight. Cynthia believed numbers possessed a moral gravity. If they strayed from truth, they would tug someone back toward them. Late one April evening in 2002, she compared network capacity invoices to capital expenditure lines and felt that tug. Expenses for routine line leases, a cost that should bleed through the income statement, had been rerouted to the balance sheet, where they posed as prepaid capacity. The reclassification inflated profit by nearly $1 billion, a cosmetic surgery so crude Cynthia wondered whether she had opened the wrong spreadsheet. She walked the corridor to Buford Yates, the corporate controller whose office smelled of pine-scented floor polish. Holding her printout like contraband, she asked why expenses wore costumes. Buford's warm grin flickered. "That's a one-off adjustment," he said, closing a leather binder. "We'll reverse it next quarter." Cynthia nodded, but doubt shadowed her steps back to the audit war room, a windowless nook crowned by humming servers and a poster that read "Integrity is what you do when no one is watching." Outside, the dot-com bubble had burst and telecom stocks lay in rubble. Yet WorldCom reported record earnings, a lone green sprout in scorched earth. Ebers cited synergies from recent mergers and vowed double-digit growth. On CNBC he joked that Mississippi catfish thrived in murky water, and so do we. Traders laughed, their screens flashing by in confident green. Meanwhile, employees whispered about layoffs, frozen travel budgets, and an edict to reuse paper clips. Cynthia expanded her probe, enlisting 2 auditors, Glynn Smith and Gene Morse, sworn to secrecy. Each night they combed the general ledger, tracing entries into a maze where ordinary costs, fiber repairs, switch rentals, vanished through a trapdoor labeled capital expenditures, corporate. The total misclassified amount now exceeded $3.3 billion. Cynthia's chest tightened. She remembered her mother balancing checkbooks to the penny and imagined that level of care estranged from a corporation steering retirement dreams. They scheduled a discreet meeting with David Myers, WorldCom's urbane chief accountant. Cynthia laid out her findings. Myers adjusted his glasses, whispered that CFO Scott Sullivan had ordered the entries. "It's temporary," he assured them, voice papery. "If we don't hit earnings targets, we risk a downgrade. Then everyone suffers." Cynthia thought of engineers testing fiber lines at dawn, their 401(k)s nodded to those earnings. She thanked Myers, but inside she felt the snap of an ethical tripwire. That weekend she phoned WorldCom's audit committee chair, former SEC Commissioner Max Bobbitt, reaching him at a North Carolina mountain cabin. In calm sentences she outlined billions in suspect entries and her fear of retaliation. Bobbitt, stunned, told her to keep digging, quietly, and promised board support. For the first time, Cynthia realized the tug in the numbers might unravel the company's entire quilt. In late June, Ebers resigned amid unrelated personal loan controversies, leaving Sullivan as acting navigator. Ratings agencies lurked like storm clouds. Cynthia's team met nightly, hiding spreadsheets behind innocuous file names, vacation photos, recipe book. On June 20th at 2:18 a.m., Gene hit enter on a pivot table that confirmed $3.85 billion in fraudulent capitalization. He exhaled a single word: finished. The next morning, Cynthia and Glynn rode the elevator with Sullivan himself. He chatted about weekend fishing. She nodded, pulse thrumming. Hours later she presented her final memo to the audit committee: material misstatement, immediate disclosure recommended. Within 48 hours, the board confronted Sullivan. He admitted the scheme but insisted it could be corrected quietly. The directors stared, silent. By evening, Sullivan was escorted out under the flicker of exit signs. Myers followed. WorldCom announced it would restate earnings by $3.8 billion, the largest accounting fraud ever disclosed, though further review would swell the figure to $11 billion. Markets reeled. Shares plunged from $15 to 20 cents. Pension funds lost billions. 17,000 employees opened pink envelopes. At the SEC, enforcement chief Stephen Cutler likened the fraud to painting a flag on a hole and calling it a game. Congress summoned Cynthia, her calm testimony a lighthouse amid rhetorical storm. Asked why she persevered, she replied, "I was raised to believe the truth is our final job." Sullivan stood trial first. Prosecutors displayed emails. "We need another $500 million are shifting, cook the gap." Jurors watched him rub his temples. The verdict, 5 counts of securities fraud, carried a 25-year sentence. Ebers followed, claiming ignorance, but phone logs showed late-night calls with Sullivan preceding every quarterly close. The jury deliberated scarcely 8 hours before convicting him on 9 counts. The judge, quoting proverbs about false scales, imposed 25 years. Ebers, once hailed as Mississippi's benevolent billionaire, reported to a Louisiana prison nursing a failing heart. He died there in 2020. WorldCom emerged from Chapter 11 rebranded as MCI, later absorbed by Verizon, its logo erased but ghostly on abandoned office mugs. Cynthia Cooper was named one of Time's Persons of the Year and wrote a memoir, though she returned to quieter pursuits. Teaching ethics workshops where she passes around a WorldCom ledger page, numbers faded, truth belatedly restored. Participants run fingers over the thin paper, amazed that billions can hide in plain sight until one person, working after hours, threads a needle between courage and collapse. Some nights Cynthia walks her Jackson neighborhood under sodium streetlights, remembering fluorescent nights in the war room. She knows control systems will forever duel ambition, that another ledger in another city may already be warping. Still, she believes in gravity. Eventually, numbers fall to earth, and when they do, someone must be there, eyes open, to chart the descent and name it honestly.